Hello, good night, and welcome to the Marseille Week show for Sunday, January the 19th, 2025. My name is GLYNE Marie, and as you would see listed on the screen, I'm supposed to be co-host with MCCLEAN. So don't believe that there's been some artificial intelligence operation done or some transgender process underway. Maxine is unfortunately detained at an earlier previous engagement, and therefore I am down to open the batting until she gets here. It's my first time in doing this exercise to start the program, and I want to thank Janine for her excellent preparation and readiness so far. So I hope to do all the hard and good work she's done so far justice. Before we get into anywhere near the national anthem, I have to give a monologue, and I have never done one before, like I said, but I will use this opportunity to get some things off my chest. Um, and saying that one of the things I want to get clear is that one of the things I would like to congratulate the government for is more successful activity so far. To me, my opinion, my judgment, my experience is the success with which it has managed to suppress, curtail, ignore, reject, sidestep, giving credible and serious information on important topics to the country. Uh, even against the background of having programmed and prosecuted and promoted the concept um, of sorry, not open government, but uh, freedom. Oh, sorry, freedom of information, freedom, and there have been promised that there'll be a Freedom of Information Act. We are back since 2018, but so far there's no mesh, there's nothing has been made, no progress has been made that direction, no steps. I have not heard of any committee, any commission set up to draft involving journalists in Barbados, nothing like that. So that to me is a dead issue. We're not. I bet you we're not likely to see anything serious done about it before the next elections, which should be probably 26, 27. But what horrifies me about this failure, this blatant failure, to me, it's just it's a direct decision as a policy decision, and I must make frequent references to the then advisor, Dr. Avinash Prasad, who in an engages with me in a talk on a call-in show some years ago, when I queried him as to why they would allow certain issues to fester into a raging controversy and put the government under pressure. He would say to me, well, they have taken a policy decision that what they want to talk about, they want to talk about, or what they don't want to talk about, they ignore. Have you seen that time and time again? But what makes this failure of the government so blatant is that it makes me recall um, an earlier serious program by the late Tom Adams in 1976 after he won the government, again a BLP prime minister. He promoted the concept of open government. And he did more than make it a slogan. He actually practiced it. We had frequent press conferences with him and his ministers and the parliamentary secretaries. There were debates on issues as they came up. So it was a very healthy public opinion, a very robust and vigorous public opinion. Apart from that, he also, in the concept of open government, he also offered the then Democratic Party opposition a chance to provide, I think, 2 members per statutory board so that they would have access to all the information on the statutory board, be able to contribute to the running of the boards and to contribute to running the government for which the very same statutory boards were set up. But I also recall that the Democratic Party refused to participate in this concept of open government by sending their own nominees on the boards in the same way that the Barbados Workers Union has a representative on most boards and other bodies, other non-governmental bodies, and so that was their position. And then when Prime Minister Adams proposed to, interestingly enough, to enlarge the size of the number of opposition seats in the Senate. At that time in '76, the number was 2, as it still is today, and he proposed to make it 4. But again, he made the offer to the then Democratic Party. I think it would have been Mrs. Sleepy Smith, who was then late Sir Frederick Smith, who was then Mr. Frederick Smith, who was then leader of the opposition. I could be wrong that detail, but I'm sure. But the rejection was that no, it would cost the country, the taxpayers, too much money, it'd be too expensive. And at that time, for what I recall, um, an ordinary senator, a regular senator, for any ministerial attachment or any other or parliamentary secretary attachment, only earns something like 600, an allowance of $600 a month, and that was then considered by the DLP as too expensive to participate in that experiment of government, and that robbed the country of the experience of seeing a more open, non-partisan government where all the information was being shared and there were more numbers available to debate it in the House of Assembly, and sorry, in the Senate. By then, the DLP would have had several members in the House of Assembly, so there was no problem there. And therefore, Prime Minister Adams had made sure that for what we are suffering now, if that had been taken up and the constitutional amended and the numbers amended suitably, we would have obviously avoided having the headache, the embarrassment of riches that this government in 2018 and 2022 had by winning all 30 seats, and therefore they're not being a leader of the opposition. They're only being restricted to 2 members in the Senate, 2 more members in the Senate. Interesting enough, which the increase in the numbers of the Senate is one of the, from I recall, when I look at the AI generated, artificially information generated recommendations of the Constitutional Review Commission, was that one of the recommendations made is to increase the number of seats for the opposition party in the Senate. So that was a proposal way ahead of its time. But Mr. Adams, who himself was a highly trained and experienced practicing journalist to the BBC and other places in England, when he lived in England before returning to Barbados, he was a very experienced, and he took the role of the media and broadcasting, newspapers very seriously. The whole question of information, there was greater respect then for the Government Information Service, which had been established by his father, Grant Leaders, in 1958 as part of the services provided by the government, by the new government. This was coming after our first universal adult suffrage election in 1951, and Grant then later becomes Mr. Grant, put certain institutions in place, including the government, building government headquarters to accommodate government headquarters. That was the headquarters of the government. Previous to then, all the ministries in government used to fit in down the Parliament buildings. I think the right wing of the Parliament building, one of the wings, the north, east, or the west wing, was, I think, the east wing upstairs. That was where the ministries were. So it was called, and for a while, even though the official name was Government Headquarters on Bay Street, that was referred to popularly as the ministerial buildings, because all the ministries were moved then into that building. Which, interestingly enough, I must make mention of this at this stage, that is now carried that if this government had its own way, that building was opened on the 20th of March 1956 by Captain Tomlin, who designed and built the building, a consummate public servant. And that is now earmarked to be sold to the highest bidder for tourism or whatever development, if this federal government has its way. So, but here, these institutions were put in place: the Government Information Service, the Government Printing. So, Government Headquarters in 1956, the Government Printing came in 1957, and GIS came in 1958. And the Government Printing was famous and highly respected not only for the quality of its work, the reliability of its work, I used to have ministerial responsibility for it, and nobody can recall. There was no record of the government really having failed to produce documents on time to meet a specific event, no matter how grand or no matter how late the work was presented to them, they always came out on time and excellent work. If they had been given a chance, if they had not been downsized at the behest, not at the behest, at the instruction of the IMF, they would have been, I'm sure, would have been willing and able to produce copies of the Constitutional Review Commission report that had been promised to be available by the Prime Minister on November the 1st to be available to the public for the public to see and discuss, which never came about. Nobody could find it. Some copies were supposed to be available at a couple of supermarkets, etc. But from what all reports never came about. So I'm saying that this was a deliberate attempt again from the government to stifle information. So I look forward to an improvement of these misbehaviors, or an eradication of such non-government, poor governance on the part of this government, which has had, which if the members of the present government of the BLP knew the history and were familiar with the history of the basic social infrastructure that its predecessors had put in place, they would have a lot more respect for what they're doing now, the damage they're doing now to the society, because it's their predecessors in the form of Granny Adams, Dr. Cummings, Tom Adams, Sir Burrell, Sir Jerry, etc. They laid and Owen had they laid the groundwork and they built on the groundwork of Sir Granny Adams, socially, economically, industrial, infrastructurally, etc. And it's a shame that this government has had such scant respect for its own history, its own legacy. I think part of the problem is not only indifference, but ignorance of the history of its very own political party. Because when you hear most of the ministers, etc., speak in the House of Assembly or even the Senate, they don't make any serious or any reflection or reference to some of the basic work done in the social and physical and industrial economic infrastructure work done upon which they are now, or rather than building and expanding, they have no damaged seriously. We are now, Barbadians are worse off now than they were when this government came into power in 2018. I think I'm getting close to the time where we normally have the national anthem, and if Janine can bring that up for me, I'd be very grateful, and we have to take it from there. The national anthem, and I would ask all those who can, if they're in the hearing of the national anthem, stand and in any other way play a reverence to it, to the Barbados, the national anthem of Barbados. And I have a very fond attachment to it. I will talk until I see Janine is ready for it. Until I see images of the video that accompanies the playing of the national anthem until they appear. I will keep speaking until that time comes. But I was reflecting on my very fond attachment to the national anthem because I had the honor in 1966 when I was a young reporter at the Barbados Advocate. When the words of the national anthem first came out, I had the privilege and the instruction. I had to write a story on the national anthem, putting the words in the press, and I used the opportunity there and then to learn the anthem there and then on the spot. So by next morning, I knew the Barbados anthem, national anthem by heart, and I've never looked back. So we therefore still have to do a lot to maintain the reverence for the anthem. Not only the anthem, but the symbols of all the symbols of Barbados' nationhood. The anthem, the flag, the national colors. I have a particular disappointment in how the official national colors of Barbados are black, gold, and ultramarine. I know we see all kind of versions of that around, and I think that has been so bastardized and abused, but because we were given, nobody sought to correct the mistake in the songs. Well, about 20 years ago, by Peter Ram called Blue, Yellow, and Black. Blue, Yellow, and Black. And I think that was cemented for the public psyche with one by Natalie was not Yellow and Black, Yellow and Black. So we have virtually a generation of people who have the wrong information in their heads, in their mind, about the colors of the national anthem. And then you see it being exhibited even in government functions, where rather than ultramarine and gold and black being uh, used to portray not the flag, you see yellow and all versions of blue, etc. That reminds me when I mentioned I'm still not seeing Janine. I'm not sure if she's hearing me or whatnot, but uh, if she's hearing me, she could at her behest put on the national anthem. But the no, the symbols are important. That made me remember that among the other things promised by the Prime Minister on her speech, the lighting ceremony on November the 1st in Heroes Square, she had given a commitment to the public. There were three. Thank you, Janine. And like most patriarchal Barbadians, we always are uplifted and inspired both by the lyrics and the rhythm and the melody of our national anthem. And there's also another interesting story tidbit I'd like to give you about the national anthem. The version that you're hearing today was not the original version. The original version was of a slower tempo, etc. It tended to drag a bit more. And I say that because I remember being invited to go to the police band headquarters to hear the new version, which had been demanded or required by Prime Minister Barrow, Barrow, who said that he wanted the anthem beefed up to give it some energy and some lift. And I think the instructions went to Mr. Cave, whoever the bandmaster was at that stage. I don't remember who it was, but so what you hear today then is a result of that version and that request by, I'm not sure if the Prime Minister always request, but he also requirement by Prime Minister Al Barrow to get a more beefed up version of the national anthem. And as we reflect on the national anthem, we also have to use this occasion, I think, to pay homage to, and I will also use this opportunity on behalf of Marcia Weeks and all the other co-hosts and technical people involved in the Marcia Weeks show to wish one and all a happy birthday coming upon on the 21st of January. That would be Tuesday. And I say so early because I will not have another occasion on which to say so, and also to express my abhorrence at the way the government has not sought has succeeded in what I call downgrading the market of Earl Barrow's Day on Tuesday at Archer's Bay with a grand picnic and family day at Archer's Bay, St. Lucie. All part of this, the excuse being that it's all part of the we coming home gathering at St. Lucie, and St. Lucie being the original part which has kicked off the celebrations again in 2018. They did it in 2018, and now they do it. I know they're doing it for, was it 28? They did, yeah. Not 2018, I'm sorry, 2020, I think it was. Anyway, be that as it may, they are because St. Lucie at the northernmost top of the island, and it's supposed to be the only church with the only part of the female name Lucy. It's always felt that it should be given precedence over others. But what we are having, I see being promoted for inviting the country to come and gather and for this grand picnic. First of all, I think the tone of the advertisement which I've been hearing on radio and TV is too raucous and loud and too rah-rahish. I think it does not do credit to the esteem and stature and status and achievement of a man like one of our national heroes. Not only just a man, but one of our national heroes, Walton Barrow. There's nothing uplifting, there's nothing noble about that promotion of that picnic, based on what I've heard and seen on radio and TV. And if you add the tone to the events, it really is just another fact for Barbadians. They have, when I look at the program for that day, the vast majority is devoted to a berriffle, a long line, chant, and enough entertainers, as if this is being used as another excuse for the most favored entertainers in Barbados, who always seem to get the nod and the pick and the selection by this government for events. Again, they are being arrayed in their numbers in St. Lucie, as though the other entertainers in Barbados are not taxpayers too, are not Barbadians, have not made a contribution, and do not deserve to have a chance to get that not only exposure, because they're not. I never heard or got the impression that those entertainers who are performing be doing it for a love of country. I understand they're being paid and paid well too. And I'm saying again on this occasion, they have not broken the government and this agency, whether it's the NCF or the Ministry of Culture or whoever, have not broken out of that straitjacket where that family, friends, and fornicators, persons, all the favorites are supposed to get the nod. I mean, this is the biggest abuse of government patronage I've ever seen in all my entire life of watching the performance of governments in Barbados. It's unbecoming, it's wrong, it's unfair, it's promoting inequality, and people don't like it. And some of the entertainers who, because they hope to get a pick or a more regular pick in the future, don't publicly comment or complain because they don't want to be victimized or further sidetracked or sidetracked. But I'm saying that. So therefore, when they look at let me look at what is happening for Earl Barrow in St. Lucie on Tuesday. Everything about it. I mean, I haven't seen promoting any T-shirts that come for the country to buy and come. But it reminds me of what you see at East Coast for April the 28th for the BLP's big picnic and celebration of national heroes there on what is supposed to be the birthday of Sir Grantley Adams, one of the founders of the Barbados Labour Party. and that has been reduced over the years systematically to fun, fat, food, frolic, fun. Nothing really that does no there's nothing uplifting. You don't learn anything more about. So granted, by going to the picnic on national heroes there, you don't even learn anything more about the national heroes. And uh, on Tuesday, from what I've seen of the program, there was not anything new we learned about Errol Barr and his contribution to Barbados, unless somebody has been commissioned to sing a song or write a poem or say something. All that is being said, nothing indicates that this will be more than just another jump up, wine and wave occasion for and the only excuse of celebrating El Bar Day. And that brings me to another complaint of mine that this mistreatment, this maltreatment of the El Bar Day, and I feel, last year, I think on the last time I was on the show, I made a call. I um, suggested that in future, the government, this government, any other government should give the Democratic Party a certain subvention, a certain sum of money, because the other institutions of Barbados get money from of the taxpayers, either directly or either through cash or kind, to celebrate their grand occasions. I understand, and nobody's ever, I think I've said it before, nobody's contradicted me, that every effort was made by the government to contribute to help fund and make possible, help make possible and facilitate the 80th anniversary of the celebration of the Barbados Workers Union. So if the Barbados Workers Union can get, without any grand announcement to government, by government, that this is what's going to be happening, or what will have happened, are going to can benefit from the taxpayers' money. Why can't the taxpayers' money go to celebrate the birthday for Mr. Albar, national hero, given all that he's done for Barbados? So I'm making that I'm repeating that again, and I see my co-host Maxine just made it, and I will give her a chance to set in. If I may finish off this point, is that
Sure.
my complaint about the degradation, the lack of imagination, the lack of intellectual capital being put into how we celebrate our major occasions. Where independence is pretty well taken care of. That is not too bad. Especially, I have to take my credit for this too, having instituted community independence celebrations in 1995, 30 years instead. That has brought a difference to it. But that apart, when we celebrate National Heroes Day, it start off nicely, and then it just deteriorated into another bank holiday. The same thing has happened to Earl Bar Day. The same thing has happened to Emancipation Day. So I am saying it is about time that serious effort from the Ministry of Culture, or they don't have to depend on the Ministry of Culture if they don't have the skills, if they don't have the time or resources. Get a collection of people from around Barbados and let them put together programs that would do justice to the moment and to the status and stature of these occasions as they should be, and not just trying to treat them as just another bank holiday that's trying hard to catch up with Kadooment Day. Uh, so that is my spiel for now. I give it to Maxine, and if she allows me to catch my breath.
Sure, for sure. Let me say thank you so much, Glenn. I don't know if I should talk about your business, but I think Glenn. Let me put it this way: this show, as I said to Janine, and I want to thank Janine and Shakwani for standing by and assisting where possible. This show must go on. It talks about resilience, reliability, resourcefulness. I like alliteration, Glenn.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you probably should be resting at this point in time, certainly resting your eyes. But you've gone the road that I went sometime last year. But I want to apologize for being late. But let me quickly say why I was late, because while I didn't know the entire program, I thought it was critical. And good evening, Carol. The Faculty of Social Sciences at the Cayfield campus is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And Glenn, as you know, I would have mentioned it, I had the honor, as I said just now, on September 1975, to enter in that faculty as a first year student part-time. I've done my first year on my 2-year part-time first year, if that made sense. You know, I wasn't full-time, so I did the first year in 2 parts over 2 years. I was one of the first students. And as it would work out, I also became one of the first lecturers in the Department of Management Studies a few years later. And that was one of many firsts. There are a lot of courses I thought I was the first person to teach them, etc. And as I sat at the 50th anniversary service just now, in fact, I had to apologize to Bishop Michael Maxwell. 2 things. One, I called him Michael Holder because that was his predecessor. And I guess I was nervous, GLYNE, about getting here and making sure that I didn't cause you to be, you know, to have to carry this, you know, because it is a joint evening. So we tag team, so to speak. So it was important. And you know, Bishop Holder, hear me again, Bishop Maxwell was there, and I acknowledged him as one of my former students. In addition to that, Imam Suleiman Bulbulia was there. He was one of my students too. So maybe there's something about spirituality. I hope it flows both ways. You know, I know it flowed from me, but it certainly can flow both ways. And I was also happy. I told those who I taught, who I didn't name, I was also happy to say that the vice principal, the deputy principal, rather, as he's correctly termed, pro-vice chancellor, Professor Winston Moore, was also my student. So 50 years ago, I was a student there, and now I am. Since I'm not going to be around another 50 years, I just want to put that on the record. But did you indicate what we were going to do this evening, GLYNE?
Not really. I was talking to Lucan, but before you move on, I just want to put on record that social science, that faculty was also the faculty which I entered. I went all past for the course at IKFL when I did history and sociology as an undergraduate. And you might not know this, but that was the time when your brother when he was there on the faculty, and I did first year economics with him.
Me too, and I
remember, but I remember it well because let's talk about history, because my first year exam in 19 I got the highest mark they said in the ever first year, 83.
Wow.
% in my first year exam in sociology. And I remember your brother and Bobby Morris, the historian, spent the whole of that summer trying to persuade me to do a pure degree in sociology. And I tell them, no, they call me.
They wanted to bring you across.
You're right. I said, no, the master is going to take too much out of me. And Wendell said, no, I'll coach you. Right. So, all in all, I ended up with upper second class honors in history and sociology for me. And I also won the history prize for the second and third year history. So I left a fairly good record there for a boy from Chapel Gap speech, and all I can say is up and on, up and on.
Up and on. Well, Wendell would love that up and on, because he up and on his 4 daughters. But I want to also, actually, GLYNE, you would, if you were in society, you might have been one of my students, because you used to hang out with that first cohort of students, Joan, Margaret, Florence. You remember them?
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I remember I wasn't one of your students.
No, but that's what I'm saying. If you were in society, you would have been, because you used to hang out with them, but you were not. In my rush to get here, I left my tablet upstairs, and I have some important information on that tablet. So I'm going to move. I'm not going to blank my screen, but I'm just going to go and get it, because I have information on our guests. But let me, before I do that, just indicate that this evening we're going to have 3 guests. At 8 o'clock, coming on with us will be Dr. Tara INNIS and Dr. Anthony Richards. They will be talking to us about Newton. We've been hearing a lot about the Newton burial ground. These are professionals who have a significant interest and experience working in relation to that. And the idea is that they will give us they will assist us, members of the loyal opposition and the audience, in understanding, what is significant about Newton Burial Ground, what is happening, and in essence, get us to contextualize the whole thing. I must tell you that I had some very interesting conversations with both of the guests, and I can tell you that I hope that we can convince them to come and talk to us about some other important issues outside of that as well, because we recognize that, you know, there's a need to understand that we're talking, and if you're talking essentially without getting into a lot of details, Newton Burial Ground is where a lot of our slave ancestors would have been buried from one particular plantation, Newton Plantation, and hopefully at some point and soon we will also get to hear from Mr. John Knox, who would be familiar with that and who's done a lot of work, as we would have heard from him before. In addition to that, the continuing concern about the ability, and I would even say the rights of our workers to benefit from national insurance through contributions as employees and persons as self-employed is something that's important to them, but it is also important to the maintenance and the ensuring the survival and strength of the National Insurance Fund and scheme. And so we will have later in the evening Mr. Stephen Strickland, who we would have heard as a senior officer before he retired at the National Insurance for many years. He will help us to understand. So GLYNE, if you can just let me run upstairs, grab my tablet and come back, because I have some precious information on there. So maybe you can say something about, you know, well, you started.
Yeah, I will continue to chat on the gathering until you get
Excellent.
back. Right. The gathering, probably one of the most talked about issues in Barbados, or non-issue, because it really has been seen through by the public. The public does not take it seriously, both for the content, the way it's done. There's no real serious, there's no budget to it. There was no budget. There was no idea how much was spent. The last truncated one that was aborted, the one that was aborted because of COVID, there's no idea how much this one will cost us. I see now where they have what heritage centers per parish. Interesting concept, but where they are creating some kind of infrastructure where each parish will have some point with this infrastructure. The first one was at St. Lucy's Parish Church, which is supposed to act as an information center and kiosk about Barbados and its heritage, the parish's heritage. Like I said, all for 11 parishes of Barbados. It'd be interesting to see whether it's done, how it goes, how it's maintained, how it's people who gets the job in them, who on what basis is operated, for example. But I think it is fair to say that so far the gathering is off to less than stellar start, and I look forward to see whether it's whether it will gather any further steam until we go there. Until then, for whatever you do I'm not sure if you're going to Arches Bay on Tuesday, but if you do, have a good time. But make sure you do it in a way that we do justice to the memory and contributing the heritage of Earl Walter and Barrow. Now your turn again, Maxine. You're back.
Yeah,
you're back.
I just want also to say a little bit though about the gathering, because for me, and I think I touched on it last time, the gathering at the heart of it was intended to bring Barbadians living abroad, the diaspora, home, to engage, to reminisce, to discuss. I mean, because it's really about, and I'll use an expression from the service today, building bridges, because people have left, they've gone abroad, they have interests, they represent Barbados abroad, they look to invest at home, they have concerns about what happens here, you know, the whole opportunity to because Barbadians constitute the biggest asset that we have in the country, and therefore we should be able to draw on the pool of assets. Now, my concern as I looked at it, and I will go back and look, is that in spreading the activity over 12 months, well, you know, the 11 parishes, let me put it that way, because there's a month or whatever that comes, and I can't even tell you exactly, that brings everybody together. That in a sense, in a small place like Barbados, and with resources, but I don't know what resources the government will be deploying, to what extent they may be taxpayers' dollars versus, you know, taxpayers' dollars supported by grant funding and philanthropic support. I don't know, because I haven't heard a lot of that discussion. All I hear is picnic and whatever. All of that is fine. But I think in the past, when we had our biennial diaspora conference, we talked about issues like investments, you know, persons coming back home and what they needed to do. We also had, as part of that engagement, not only the conference there every 2 years, but we had a Barbados Comes to, where Barbadian companies, education institutions, etc., went into different locations in the North America, and plans were for the UK, etc., to explore in very concrete terms how we could benefit, and a bi-directional benefit. In other words, how can we assist the diaspora persons living abroad, and how could they assist Barbados? How could we draw on their talents? How can we build networks, etc.? So there used to be a theme with some solid workshops, and a whole set of things with some identified deliverables. I mean, and in fact, if I might say so, in her absence, I recall Marcia Weeks as a filmmaker attending one of those. I think it might have been 2014. One of those for sure. And in looking at the activities we had there, her whole business perspective in terms of how she could really utilize her skills and talents as a filmmaker, etc., as a creative, would have been sharpened, you know, and she benefited from that. I mean, perhaps one of these days I may ask her to speak to us about it. So I am concerned that, and I wrote down the words here as you were talking, Glyne, substance beyond form. You know, I would hope that when we have these things, that we would have some kind of substance coming out of that whole exercise, and so on. And the other thing is, somebody raised it with me, and I didn't think about it too much at the time, but the concern was that you're having, and I mean, if you have 11 parishes, you're going to have to start in January or whatever, but at the time, this is the peak season for tourism. And so people who may want to be in other words, would it make sense to kind of push, rather than have the entire 11 months or 12, you know, over that perhaps you could have perhaps maybe clustered some parishes together, so that you could have brought it closer to when, because some people come and stay in hotels. They obviously, when they come, they're going to use, because, you know, community tourism, they're going to do a lot more. So in essence, you might have been looking at how could you target that period to spread the spend, if you see what I mean. So I think that there's a lot. And the other thing I will say, because I'm keeping my eye on the time.
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments on that issue further too.
So I'm just going to say this. And the other thing that I was thinking about is the whole, it just slipped my mind. But I'll come back to it. It is the whole planning. Oh yes, when I said planning, when events are planned, I don't know. Certainly, when I was responsible for planning events, whether it was the 50th anniversary of independence celebration, which we had for a year, or those diaspora conferences, you brought in a cross section of stakeholders. Let me use that word. People who had an interest in the thing, and so you were able to pool ideas. You know, so I don't know what the planning process is, but over to you, Glyne.
Yeah, I said last time, Maxine, I think what you're indirectly referring to a point you made last time. When I evaluate what has been portrayed and projected so far as we gathering, I think right now it is an idea which is looking for a reason to exist and to continue. I really think so, and I say that because this seems to me, this is reminiscent of some things I used to hear the Prime Minister's uncle Alain Bemoi talk about. These reunited and bring people back together. and maybe part of the reason I had some ideas that Barbados should do this. I know it's been done in Jamaica, it's been done in Ghana, some other parts of Africa, Sierra Leone, etc. Um, but I think because this doesn't seem to come out of somebody who is familiar, relate enough to the Barbarian diaspora, the Barbarian society, to come up and drive and require a program that will meet certain standards and have certain substance because it has not been properly thought through. So there's not much substance to it. There's just, like you said, form and frivolity to it. Because having lived abroad on my own and having represented Barbados abroad, having intermixed with Barbadians on various occasions abroad, I know most Barbadians come home for certain specific things.
Yes.
And so certain particular fest, a wedding, a funeral, 40th funeral, a birthday, an anniversary, a national festival, something major. But I don't think, and they usually know well in advance in order to plan to do it because they're not rolling in money abroad, especially in this day and age when high cost of living is afflicting every country in the world virtually. So, and plus, the as you would know, Maxine, getting holiday leave is not as easy and readily available and as generous as we do in Barbados.
True.
For
that is very true. Yes.
For people in North America to get 2 weeks leave, holiday leave, they have to be working 10, 12, maybe 15 years. Because some of you accumulate your leave and some coming up there by the number of hours you work. So every time you work a number of hours, you are qualifying for more hours at leave. So it's not like after the first year you get what in Barbados after the first year you get what 2-3 years leave.
Yes.
2 or 3 weeks leave after the first year.
Yes, their standard is like 2.
Okay, there you are, right. So therefore the opportunity, the ability, the readiness of people to come home. Just if I want to come home to St. Michael, I'll have to know maybe a year in advance that I want to come home because my plans might not normally, my annual leave might not normally coincide with what's happening in St. Michael, which was my birth parish. So I'm saying not enough lead time was given. Not enough, and I think too many people were giving people what they think people will want, what they think people should have, rather than having consulted with persons and know what would it be that I would want to say or do or come in Barbados. And I say that because I know from my intermingling with Barbados that I think that this opportunity should have been given to clean up some of the areas of complaint of poor service in Barbados, of getting things done, renewing a driver's license, registering a car, paying land tax, all those things that many Bajans come home to do or contribute to. Or get certain basic functions done in the private sector, dealing with lawyers and that kind of thing, or going to the registry. So I think those are the things that should be factored in where you can satisfy some of their concerns, satisfy their desires, while at the same time give them a reason to celebrate. And go ahead.
No, I was saying you're correct.
And therefore, I think that is what and resources is important because I remember in the previous iteration, previous version of regathering when I knew having worked with Prime Minister Arthur, Minister of Finance, before you undertake any project, any post, you have to know where the money was coming from to finance it. That was basic. I remember asking one of the operatives of the earlier version of regathering where the money was, how much it was cost, where the money was coming from. I was told bluntly, honestly but bluntly, that they had no set budget. They were getting money from various departments, various ministries to do certain projects. So it was you were playing it by ear sort of thing, a little ramshackle, informal thing. So maybe that is what is happening now. But especially just one last thing, especially in this day of tightness where there's nobody in my natural life of Barbados who's doing well, who's having it easy. None. People who themselves thought they were going to be doing all right in their old age with the cost of living and all the impositions being made through the IMF or standard of living, etc. They have less disposable income, and therefore they are have a variable having to spend their money on things which are not as productive as they could be, for which they and the society are not benefiting.
I'm going to speak to Carol is saying the administration needs to stop copying ideas and surround themselves with persons who are creative like Marcia Weeks, Maxine McLean, and Mr. Murray. Let me say that one of the, in terms of, if you want to copy ideas, look at things that have worked in Barbados, because as we had said before, even the name the gathering, the gathering in Ireland was something, and I had my experience with somebody, an Irishman, as I said before, coming to sell me that idea. But I think at the end of the day, there's a beautiful thing about, we talk about bureaucracy, but one of the good things that you can, that is part of the running of the public service, is the keeping of records. So in essence, you have had conferences, you have had engagements with the diaspora. So instead of reinventing the wheel and copying somebody else's, program, why don't you go and look and see what we did in Barbados before? Of course, we know that people may want to say, well, get parties and say, well, no, that was done by a previous administration, we can't look at that. And I don't agree. You look to see, because as I said, when you look at the way the things were designed, developed, and budgeted for, because GLYNE touched on in what may be the absence of a clear budget and so on, when those things were done, the record should show how the process went. A lot of the officers who might have been involved in these activities, would also have been there. And some of them are still there, and or even some of them who may be retired may be there to help you, and so
you're making a good point, Maxine. I'm a great defender of the so-called the bureaucracy, and I don't think people should excuse themselves for having the bureaucracy. I'm a fan of a sociologist called Max Weber, Weber, who was the strength, the intended, the ideal strength of a bureaucracy is that it's supposed to be impartial, regular, fair, just, predictable outcomes as long as the criteria are met. So you have certain steps to be taken, certain processes to be gone through to come out with a particular result. And that's why process matters. But I think we're into an era where now people in this present government, the consultants and what have drilled it into their head that know that we probably all the previous standards and methods that served Barbados well and made Barbados being hailed as the best run black nation in the world have now become quote unquote colonial. But I make no apology for having grown up as a colony. There are things I benefited from. I'm proud of my colonial offerings that I myself have selected to be part of my life that I thought are admirable as my African. So, but it's because you're going to throw away your records, your systems, your procedure. And one of the benefits of a bureaucracy, the checks and balances it has built into it to make sure there's little or no abuse. They're supposed to protect itself, the process, the recipients, the beneficiary. So there's a lot to be said about bureaucracies, but this attitude that nothing good came out of colonialism, that you should all get rid of, they're not telling you what to replace it by. Nobody sat down and work out the alternatives. But just to say, you look at, and some of those comments come from the private sector, and the private sector itself has its bureaucracy, it has its chain of command, it has a hierarchy, it has its directors, its management, all those are part of the bureaucracy. So there's a certain process and policy and predictability and expected outcome. Otherwise, chaos would reign every day if everybody was doing it what they thought they would like to do or what they prefer as against what is expected of them by the institution, etc.
Well, and this was Sharon is commenting about the vacation leave, but North America is very different. And if you have, if you have 2 weeks, one of the reasons why we also would have had a conference close to just before Kaduma was that people could have the advantage of summer holidays if they were children. Two, that you could have the conference and all that was part of that, and also enjoy, for those who had the time, the rest of the ending of crop over. Now I'm just going to ask Oh dear, I'm getting.
Doc,
I
Dr.
really.
Dr. Ennis,
Our sisters. Janine. I
Janine.
almost call her Tiffany. Don't ask me where that name came from. Janine. If our guests are in the green room, and you can, as soon as they're there, you can let them in, and I would introduce our guests. Um, yes, there we have Dr. Tara Innis, and I am just making sure I have the proper introductions. Okay, Dr. Innes, welcome, and I will wait for a second to see if Dr. Richards is with us, and then I would introduce you both. And I really want to thank you at the very short notice that I gave you. But as I indicate, when these issues become topical, sometimes we like to get the opportunity while they are, topical, to get our audience to understand, because a lot is said and people, do not have a proper context. And I know as a historian. So what I will do is I will introduce you as I will.
Maxine, if I may interrupt, just a
Yeah.
point that it is not just not yet 8 o'clock. So maybe
Oh,
the other
yes.
guest is
Oh, I
it
see.
is still
Sorry. I am.
right.
Yes.
So
Right. So, but
but
while we're doing that, I will introduce Dr. Tara Innes, and when he comes in, and I'm going to read it to make sure, because I just rushed here from campus. I celebrate the 50th anniversary of my faculty, and as I say to my bishop, when I called him by the wrong surname, I said, "Forgive me. If I was a student in the faculty 50 years ago, it means that I'm a little older than some of the audience." So that was there at the celebration. So as I said, we are very fortunate to have these first two guests this evening, and Dr. Tara Innes is the Deputy Dean Outreach for the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and a lecturer in the Department of History and Philosophy. And let me say that was my intention when I went to Cave Hill to do history. So I still love it, and that's why I look forward. Dr. Innes holds a PhD in Caribbean history from the University of West Indies Cave Hill campus, and a master's in international social development at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. So you traveled all the way to Australia and back. Thankfully, you're back with us. And she served in several capacities, including as a delegate for the government of Barbados on the World Heritage Committee and the Intergovernmental Committee for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention. And perhaps if we have a time, you can tell us a little bit about what's the significance of that. She's also a member of the Barbados research team for UNESCO World Heritage Property Historic Bridgetown and its garrison, and the nomination for the Industrial Heritage of Barbados, the story of sugar and rum, which is a second effort to have another UNESCO recognized heritage site. And I do recall, Dr. Innes, in fact, I have a massive document which was part of the work done for to secure the status for Bridgetown and its historic garrison. I think I have it in the right order, right? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my introduction of Dr. Innes. And right on time, we have our second guest, Dr. Anthony Richards. I think she's left out your S on there, but I trust you will forgive us. I just explained that I was rushing to do something else to make sure I got here. And I said goodbye to my spiritual leader, who was once my student. So I guess he could assume the second role and accept my departure. But let me introduce you, Dr. Anthony Richards, and let me say thank you very much for joining me and ensuring that I was able to make contact with Dr. Innes. Dr. Anthony Richards is a regional consultant in biosecurity management. And you have to come back and talk to us a lot more about that. He holds degrees in biochemistry from the University of West Indies, Cave Hill, and King's College London. And having left the Caribbean, he came back in 1997, and he served as head of laboratories in various countries and in the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards Quality. Some of us call it CROSSCRU for short. And of importance here this evening is that he's interested in the continued cultural connections between Africa and the Caribbean, And this interest has led him to supporting museums, the work of the museum in managing let me see if I pronounce it. Um, let me make sure. Ancestral, that's the word. Um, Burial ground or ancestral. There may be a type was ancestral. Ancestral.
Yes,
Yes, ancestral. Sorry, there was a slight typo. I thought you were introducing me to a new word. That's all right. Ancestral burial ground at Newton Plantation. So, in essence, we have a historian and we have a scientist. Let me so describe you as simple as I can, who both have an important important interest in what is
Maxine,
considered to be historic. Mm-hmm.
yeah, before our guests make the
Mm-hmm.
individual presentations, I'd just like to welcome them to personally, because the subject is what caught my eye. It relates an area which I've had some interest in, which I've had some studies in. I've done some studies in cultural anthropology. I'm also involved in sociology, human behavior psychology, social psychology, whatever. But most of all, I'm a life member of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. So I've taken that interest that far, and I quite look forward to the annual bulletins they put out. It's quite
Right.
rich. So when I've been trying to track this topic, so when I saw it in the press, the concerns being expressed, very vague, very general. I thought that this is something that, for the good of the country, so that the country cannot bite into these subjects unless they are made familiar with it, made digestible, etc. Then you get their support. Otherwise, it becomes abstract and remote from the main society. So I thought there's that context which I welcome your presence here, both of you. And it's against that background, then I'll be asking and prodding and trying to get some information of you in this regard. So welcome to
Provided
the
they can
Martinique
answer the
show.
questions that you prod or you pose. That you try to prod them about. Okay. Okay. Finished, Glenn, or are you?
Yeah, I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay.
Over to
Well,
you.
but thanks. And I just want, I was ladies first, as they say, in this case. As a historian, I really would like perhaps, Dr. Innis, for you to just give our audience a sense of why this is important. And let me say that our audience stretches beyond Barbados and the region. We often have viewers on the continent itself, as we've had participants in the show frequently. And the host of the show, the hostess of the show, Marcy, is actually in Kenya at the moment. So why is this ancestral burial ground important to us in Barbados and the region?
Well, thank you, and it's really a pleasure to be able to present and to be here with Dr. Richards. He might be a scientist, but I'm a historian of science and medicine, and he's probably a scientist who's interested in history. So we always kind of come together, even in the courses that I teach at UE. So I have great respect for his work, and we've come together really. You know, we've always, both of us have been very, very interested and passionate about this particular site, because it really is one of the only sites that has been found. So one of the only burial sites, so it's called a communal burial site for the enslaved in a plantation setting, that was uncovered in about the 1970s. Through some oral history that was done with Professor Jerome Handler, and really a worker who had been walking through the plantation yard. Jerome Handler had been looking for months and months and months, going through records, actually doing some landscape surveys, getting a little bit of archaeology done, looking for burial grounds, because of course, there ought to be a lot of burial grounds that you can find in Barbados for the enslaved. Now, remember, the enslaved were not Christianized in Barbados, so they did not have the ability to be buried in churchyards. So very frequently, they were buried on plantation grounds. And over time, some of those fields that they might have been buried in were lost to sugar production. So they were recultivated. So where he tried to find them, even though they might have been labeled on field maps, he couldn't find them. And this was one of the only sites that came up just through oral history. And when he kind of uncovered that information, he was able to do a bit of excavation with Frederick Lang in the 1970s. Now, I just want to caution our listeners here today, you wouldn't necessarily do that today, right? You wouldn't necessarily want to excavate burial grounds of human beings for anthropological or archaeological purposes today. It's considered unethical. But at the time, he did, and that yielded a whole lot of information that became so important to understanding slavery studies, biology, and nutrition, the osteology of enslaved people, not only here in Barbados, but really across the region. So it's quite an important site, and that's why it's one of the sites that is part of the UNESCO World Heritage nomination for the story of sugar and rum, the industrial heritage of Barbados. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And having given us that introduction, I would probably ask Dr. Richards to share your interest in this, given the information that we've heard, recognizing that it is pretty unique in several ways. How, of what significance is this for you personally? And then how do you see that, being of interest or should be of interest to us in Barbados and the Caribbean?
Good evening. Yes. I was born in Antigua and Barbuda and did my first degree here in Cave Hill. And, during those years, I did not know about Newton, although it had been excavated. But returning here 30 years later, I was delighted to find out what had been done and to learn how precious it was. It is unique. Right? I do not hesitate to say that. It's not in Jamaica, it's not in Trinidad. It falls upon Barbados to manage it. And I've had the pleasure of taking many visitors there. Each year, I have a group of students coming out from a university in Pennsylvania. And with the help of Dr. INNIS, we go to Newton burial ground and hear the story of the people buried there, but also the stories that have been uncovered of the amazing, amazing African families who lived there, Afro-Barbadians. Given time, Dr. INNIS will fascinate you with stories that have been uncovered by many historians. I think that we have a very huge responsibility here in protecting the Newton burial ground. In the United States, it's very difficult to find burial grounds of enslaved people. One was accidentally discovered in New York, where many African Americans and some enslaved people were buried. I say African Americans to refer to freed people. And the community, the African American community in New York rose up and took control of that archaeology, right? Changing forever the dynamics of archaeology in the United States. A new type of archaeology was born, thanks to the reaction of the public. The public directed the archaeology and how things were handled. The finds that were discovered in Newton burial ground in the 1970s and in subsequent years by chemical analysis are extraordinary. We don't have the opportunity to do that again. And later on, I hope to be able to share some of those details.
Maxine, if I might
sure, go ahead.
Interject here. I've been, like I said, I have a personal interest and some kind of involvement in this kind of field in a way. So I've been very impressed by the way you have both presented your interest, your involvement, your assessment of the importance of the invaluable asset that it is to Barbados and the Caribbean. You talk about protecting and I'm going to ask my question based on the fact that I remember we also had a similar uh, proclamation about the Bridgetown World Heritage and okay. So but to me, that has been underutilized, underappreciated, underprotected, undervalued, etc. So I'm saying, what then, given the outstanding and exceptional value of this ground, this burial ground, what could have gone wrong? You talk protect. What would have happened to that would have raised the concerns of those involved about the protection which have been promised had not been uh, provided. Is it true if we're doing any damage to your professionalism? Is it true that some grounds are a care something involved in a care park that caused great upset to the committee and the people working on it? Weren't there protocols and weren't the protocols? I'm just trying to understand why, if this is so exceptional, why mistakes could have been made in it.
You're muted. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can feel that question.
Okay,
so,
great. Thanks.
So one of our concerns is with the project, which is to help build a memorial around or just above the enslaved burial ground at Newton, is that really we have to understand the site as both an archaeological site. So this is an archaeological site. There's some archaeology had happened here. Of course, there are more archaeological questions that we would have loved to get answers to. So we know where people died. We know where they've been buried, but we would have loved to know a little bit more about how they lived and the relationship between the burial ground and perhaps what was known as the upper and lower Negro Yard or the slave village. So we had made some recommendations. This was within the museums committee, just to say, look, before you start doing some civil works there, could we do some archaeology? Could we find out if we can answer some of these questions? And unfortunately, I think civil works kind of started before they let the museum know, and then before we could do that archaeology. So that was very concerning. Obviously,
If I may ask you, who is in charge of the project?
well,
Ministerially, right? Help me. The
right.
museum
So
or the developer?
right, the government of Barbados through the BTI is in charge of the development, the memorial development. But I think any questions about the memorial should be really directed to them. But what I could talk to you about were our concerns and continue to be some of our concerns as well. And because, and I know you said you're a member of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, our last journal came out with an article. So the journal came out with an article speaking to some of the ground penetrating radar analysis or surveys that were done a couple of years ago, and now published in the journal, that basically spoke to the idea that we don't really know the full extent of the burial ground. So the museum had been transferred a certain parcel of land that had the excavation work done on it, but the burial ground could have been a slightly bigger, maybe in different areas. So we wanted to make sure that all of those areas were fully protected, and really a buffer zone, which is required under World Heritage anyways, a buffer zone. So this would be a area around that would protect the actual burial ground. So maybe it's 50 meters or 70 meters, whatever it was, that should be honored, so that we really could do that mapping, so that we would have a better understanding of the full extent of the burial ground. So that was a major concern, that didn't happen, and in essence, some of the work seems to have encroached or come very close to the museum's boundary. So that caused a bit of a concern as well. And then what they're trying to do right now really is to do some archaeology or some survey work after the fact. But of course, before would have been much better for our understanding, the whole understanding of the site. And then beyond that, it's also understanding that we have groups in Barbados. So these are religious groups in Barbados,
Right.
spiritual Baptists and Orisha groups, as well as the Barbados Museum had been working with really the multi-faith community to understand this site, as the enslaved who were interred there had probably a multiplicity of different beliefs. We didn't want to inscribe any particular belief on those persons. So we just took an idea that, well, let's just try to work with the existing faiths to honor that memory. But certainly spiritual Baptists and Orisha members utilize the site for ancestral veneration or worship. And they were very concerned that certain things hadn't been done to allow for this development to take place. So meaning that the ground was disturbed without any permission given by the ancestors. Really.
I want to ask pull a couple things together, because in your initial comments, you were saying that when you mentioned the initial excavation, and you were saying that such excavation now, as you were saying to people, is now unethical. And I was wondering, one, given that, and you talked about probably hoping to do some surveying work, how would you further seek to identify what, because you said the full extent of the burial ground is not known, and, the wish that you could do some work. Two things. One, how would the work be carried out, such archaeological work be carried out now? And let's say, for example, if somebody discovered by accident that there was let's say somebody was excavating to construct a house in another part of the country, and evidence was there that you might have a similar kind or something which looks like that, and so on. What is the methodology for investigating that?
Okay, well, I'm a historian. I'm not an archaeologist, but I know a little bit of archaeology. But I studied a little bit. Dr. Watson, who recently passed, was my lecturer, and we did some archaeology together. What I will say is that archaeology is not like Indiana Jones. We have this idea that, we go around the world pillaging and excavating and doing all of these things with cultural objects. Archaeologists are actually much more concerned in the first instance with not disturbing the land at all, just understanding the landscape. And you can do that with identifying certain features. But if you are going to do some excavation work or development on land, that becomes a great opportunity to use those techniques of archaeology and excavation, right? So in the burial, not in the burial, but in the slave village site, it would have been great to use some of those skills to see if we could unearth any information that connected us to that living population at the time. But in the burial area, we don't want to do any excavation at all. We just want to protect. And there is some technology called ground penetrating radar, which is really using radar signals that kind of beat down into the ground. The energy creates a bit of a map or an image. And from that, Dr. Whiting, who had been doing that research, was able to really tell us, well, their burials here, very close to the boundary. They're here, and maybe they're much more than the 570 burials that had been detected before. He could start to ask those questions without even going into the ground. So, and that's really important from an ethical perspective with managing burial grounds.
Okay, I just want to ask a question, Dr. Richards, to you. Based on the excavation that would have been done, what kinds of information would have been unearthed and gathered in relation to the Newton burial ground? You're muted. You need to.
Let me just unmute and say, first of all, let's be clear. Dr. Innis there spoke of at least two portions of the plantation which are of interest to archaeology. One would be the burial ground, and the other area would have been the places where people lived. Now, Africans sometimes buried underneath their homes, underneath their houses, depending on the culture. So they are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Okay? And what Dr. Innis was saying there is that with the work on the car park, the opportunity to carefully investigate what we call the village area is seriously compromised. The, the earth there has been scraped up and piled up into a mountain to the
Wow.
side.
Wow.
And the best we can do now is to go and sift to see
Okay.
what is there. Now, it's, as we say, it's not about Indiana Jones. We are not looking for pieces of gold and fantastic objects. Nonetheless, some very amazing things can turn up. What's much more important today is something we call the context. Okay? So by year after year or generation after generation, carefully studying the site, we could have gone down and looked to see the footprint of the village, looking at changes in the color of the soil and so on. You could say, oh, look, in the 1600s, the village was here. And then look, it got bigger. And then it looks like they abandoned that bit and shifted over here. But you need everything to be in place, not piled up into a mountain, right? If you went there and you saw by excavation 3 stones put together, burnt black, what would you think? Hey, this was a fireplace,
Right.
Right.
but we've only found 1 or 2. Hey, did they cook communally? You know, and questions like that. And we'd look in the histories, the documents to see if that added up. If we in one place in the United States, underneath the house of a cook, enslaved cook, a bunch of round stones was found together. And some people said, hey, it was worry. They were playing worry and hid it under the floor. Something similar to that was found at St. Nicholas Abbey.
Mm.
But but if we go to the pile of dirt now and we find a stone over here and a
What's
stone
the
over there,
like you said? What's the
we don't
context?
know that they had anything
Yes.
to do with each other,
That's
right?
not the
No
original.
context,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
carbon from that fire could have been dated. Yeah, you could have found out what kind of wood was growing around there. You
Wow.
know, great care, right, was being taken by the museum, even to mark the hedge, to make a hedge, to mark the boundary. We studied tens of thousands of grave sites in CARICOM. I personally have studied thousands and thousands of graves and looked at the plants that grow on them. And from those, right, we selected the plants that the enslaved might have used back home in Africa and in Barbados, right, to mark graves. Right? Um, Back in the day, when the archaeology was done now on the funerary site, on the cemetery site, some remarkable finds were made. Um, there was one guy there who was wearing an extraordinary set of beads. Right? Can I see the picture that we sent you,
I'm
please?
unfortunately I'm not sure I was able to get it up because I rushed home. Can you Shakwani, can Dr. Richards, you have it on your system? Because let me see if I can get it to her and we'll come back to it. So if you can talk, because I came home
Okay, but
late.
I'll tell you, this
I'll see
person,
if I can send it to her now and see if she can do that
fantastic.
for me.
Okay,
But you can describe what
well,
you said,
one of
what
the
was found.
bodies, one of the bodies was just bones, but you could see on the bones that there were bracelets of metal, right? Corroded metal, green metal showing copper bracelets. And then in the around the neck area and among the ribs was a couple dozen beads. and cowrie shells and teeth of a canine like a dog. And when you laid them out, you could see that this was a fantastic necklace. And because of the combination of materials, people thought that this richly dressed uh, person, right, wearing insignia that could have been from Africa, right, may have been somebody of high status in the village, a leader or somebody of the sort, and he's been given the nickname the healer, you know. And there were other extraordinary burials. One of the items which was found on the necklace, wish I could show you, was a red
I'm trying to get it
semi-precious
up, so
stone.
if you can, I'll get it
Yeah,
for you.
yeah, a red semi-precious stone, the gemstone carnelian. Now, that the science done on that stone, right, the chemistry, shows that that stone was mined in India.
Wow.
Right, underlining the international and global networks that Barbados was connected to. Somehow, that bead found its way into the hands of an enslaved person in Barbados. And these beads are known to be important in the Muslim religion, and they're also known to be important in Ghana. Right?
I was just going to
So
ask
our
you, when you mentioned Muslim religion, I suspect well, some of the slaves would have probably been practicing Muslims.
It's always possible. And that's why the Muslims of Barbados have a representative on the museum's committee for managing Newton burial ground.
I've sent the picture off to because technically the show was set up in Kenya because Mars is there, but we're trying to do. Oh, thank you. Here it is. There you go.
Oh, thank you so much. So
Wow.
the outer halo is the canine's teeth.
Wow.
And as you pointed out to me earlier, that those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7
Maurice.
White shells are cowrie shells.
Money.
And they represent money in many parts of the world. They also represent things like the spiritual eye, you know, the eyes of the spirits looking at you. And right in the middle is that carnelian semi-precious stone, right, from India of significance to both Muslims and West Africans. And you can be both West African and Muslim,
Yeah.
as you pointed out.
In fact, this leads to two comment. Well, a question. I think it was John. I think it was EZD who had asked about the presence of Africans here before the colonials came. You know, and the other thing is that in recent years, I have read about the descendants of Africans in India. You have communities, and there was one in particular I read about, and I must share it sometime with the persons in the show. These are and they look very African in a lot of respects, and they live in India. They speak whatever language, whether it's Hindi or whatever, from the area they are. So I am thinking, I'm looking at the semi-precious stone that you mentioned, and the question is how, the movement between continents, and and so this kind of thing is extremely intriguing, and I suppose, yeah, go ahead.
Maxine, I want to thank Dr. Richards for affording me this opportunity to view this magnificent spectacle here.
Yeah.
That was found. It really is, and it therefore reinforces my question. I'm almost angered, given what you said about the conceptual and actual value of this culturally in every possible way. How could such an effrontery, how could such a near cultural disaster could take place on this project? And when I listen to the mouthings of the public relations officer of BTII speaking about the project, I'd love to know the name of the company that did it. I really would love to know that.
We
But
gotta have to do some investigating, you know.
and I won't put you
he
two
used to be
folks
a
on spot.
journalist, right? So he's not gonna stop.
No, not only that, but and I have a disdain for public relations officers because they spin whatever story they tell to make their principles look good. They don't deal with the truth or the facts. And a lot was said, there's a lot of mealy mouthy and reassurances or whatever. But I am now beginning to get an idea of what ran. My question is, how could it have gone wrong? Is it there a system of regular meetings between yourselves, your committee, the BTII, the project operator, the company, the museum, so that people know weren't there set up protocols or procedures that if this is hand and don't you have people on the site keeping an eye on the Philistines that are the developers who just want to make money, make a profit, and get off as quickly as possible. So I'm saying, what is the mechanism? What is the process of checks and balances to make sure that the integrity and the value of the process and the content, the materials, like whatever, the findings and the possibilities are maintained, respected, regarded, whatever. Because what it seems to me is that for this thing to happen, it seems to have been a loose arrangement. Am I right or wrong?
Well, I can't really speak to what did or didn't happen on the developer side, other than what I can tell you is that we didn't have a lot of interaction with the developer. So the idea here, though, is that I think what we need to focus on is that there are certain recommendations that we certainly went forward. The museum owns the burial ground. And of course, there are archaeological questions, not only in the protection of the burial ground, but also the questions that might have needed to be answered. And this is a very regular part of the development process. The archaeologists would say, well, we want to do some work. If you're going to do some excavation work, we want to do some work. We might do some before you start. And then we want to be there on the site when things begin, to watch and see what might come up. So if that didn't happen, I think questions need to be answered and directed to the developers as to how that occurred.
Or the bosses of the developers.
Right, or whoever it is that needs to answer those questions. But what I will say is that there are efforts right now to do as much as possible to address concerns and to possibly mitigate where necessary. So I'm not going to apologize for any side of this. Of course, we were very, very concerned and upset that this even happened. But I think in the haste of how things sometimes happen, when you talked about bureaucracy before, I was there when you were talking about bureaucracy just before the segment, and I don't know what might have happened or not happened to
slackness.
overcome some of the impediments.
I'll say it for you, slackness.
So, yeah.
No, the unfortunate reality, and this is what concerns me, and GLYNE and I can say this as two former
ministers in government,
ministers on both sides of the political divide. So people tend to say when you try to express a thing that it might be partisan, but we're looking at an issue in terms of its significance to the country. But I think part of the challenge I have is that we seem, the contradiction is that here we are seeking to memorialize our ancestors. That suggests to me a level of reverence in how we go about doing what we do, because I understand that we would have to pose a number of questions to other people and have that conversation between other persons, other stakeholders, let me put it that way. But it just is a contradiction that here you are doing something which is supposed to recognize the significance of a site, which would suggest to me that
not only recognize and protect the a site which is, to me, I call it sacred. I remember when I was a student at
was it Ohio or Louisiana? I think it was in Louisiana. There was a mound on campus, which was considered a sacred site. It was a sacred site of some of the original peoples of the Americas. And I remember some students messing around, and some of them got injured because they were, to my mind, they were desecrating the site. And then there was some accident, and I said, but you need to respect these things. So I just find it difficult. I mean, and in talking about what was found, Dr. Richards, I don't know, and I really appreciate. I think I'm so glad we were able to present the picture, because just talking about it and seeing it, are there any other kinds of information, other findings which we were able to secure prior, well, in relation to going back to Handler's excavation and that research? What are anything else? Because somebody mentioned worry, you mentioned worry, and as a child, I don't know how many Barbadians played worry, but I grew up just at the foot of the university. I'm a Black Rock person. And I remember going, as we used to call it, go up the hill, because there was a bit of elevation behind my house. We were on the Black Rock, on the Highway 1 level. But I, as a little girl, used to sit and watch a few old men playing worry, and we learned to play. I have a worry board, which I acquired some years ago. But I mean, it told me something. And then I went to Zanzibar some years ago in mid-90s to a conference. And I watched these little boys, instead of having the two rows, it was a 3-row board. And I mean, for all those who don't know worry, and it tells us something about the intellect, is a mathematical game, And there were these little boys playing, and I could hardly keep track of, the game, because they were so adept at the thing. So I'm just saying, because you mentioned the word, and it just triggered that in my mind, that here is information that might have been lost, which really helped us perhaps to understand recreation, to understand maybe religious
the culture, the culture, the way of life.
So Dr. Richards, I don't know if you want to share anything else that you either know that might have been found, or other things that we might have learned, or we can learn from a site like this.
Well, first of all, let me just be clear that no worry or similar seeds, stones were found in excavations during the 1970s at the burial ground in Newton. The sites I mentioned were elsewhere, one in the United States, and one wonderfully, just a few years ago, at St. Nicholas Abbey, which belonged to the same family, Dr. INNIS teaches me.
Right.
Belongs to the same family that owned Newton
That's right.
burial ground. Now, what worry tells us there is about the connections, between the evidence of the connections that continue to run. I taught worry. I had the very good experience of teaching a number of ministers the covered government to play worry in the Quilombo pop-up village this emancipation season, right? And the joy of watching the special ed boy being beaten, right, by the permanent secretary of youth. So that was quite wonderful. We'd invited 600 children to the Quilombo, and worry was one of the things that they were teaching. This year also, speaking of worry, a contingent for Barbados participated for the first time in World Worry Games and performed beautifully. On the site, what we need to understand is that since it came to light, the faith community in Barbados keeps making use of it. Hikers go through there, right? Students have to go there. Just before much of this came to light, a prophecy was given in a church, a spiritual Baptist church, by Mother Cheryl, and she had to go to Newton and experience, had a spiritual revelation, a spiritual experience of the people, our ancestors speaking to her. And then all of this came to light, and it broke many people's hearts and brought tears to many and I that the grounds were under threat. I'm happy to say that the government has met the faith community last week at the museum. Some representatives came out and had a first strong exchange of views with some representatives from the government. But there's a long way to go to set it straight in their eyes. And I feel a great burden of guilt that I have been alive and in Barbados at the time that this thing has happened. And I feel that, to take the words of one of the ministers that was there, right, an atonement must be done. And we must set up, I believe, a center of atonement, showing the things which are discovered on that great heap, and do continued research on what's to be found in the great village heap.
So in
Somebody,
essence, what you're saying,
Maxine,
yeah,
Maxine,
okay, yeah.
if I might.
Yeah, but
Dr.
I
Richards.
just wanted to, before you do that, Glenn, I just wanted him to, Dr. Richards, to repeat what he said in terms of trying to make the best of what has happened in terms, you were saying set up a center of atonement,
Right.
which would allow for further
Forgiveness.
analysis of the materials, you know. So in essence, one of the things that there has to be some securing of those materials, which would allow for that kind of investigation and research. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but I feel very strongly. I've grown up from the time I was a child. I was telling Dr. Innis that and I think I told you, Dr. Richards, that my initial entry to university was to study African and Caribbean history. You know, and I feel very strongly about this, because as a people, we do not know enough about our ancestry and so on, and what there is. We should have maximum opportunity. Glyne, over to you.
Yeah. I said that one of the reasons why I'm pursuing this is that I'm very familiar with the traditional culture of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. They are laissez-faire, they're back. But I think this is such an effrontery to all of Barbados that we should not allow this to be swept under the carpet. Heads should roll. So, some people have to be read. Whatever corrective measure should be taken to make sure that it does not happen again. And it worries me that we are doing lots of work around in and around Bridgetown, all kind of projects, and slaves who then worked and died and landed from Africa. They all kind of what is happening to protect the possibilities down there. So therefore, I think that we should. I am interested to make sure that every effort is made to take as many corrective action. Might be too late on certain things, but I don't think it should be allowed to meander. And see, I think swift action and public action should be taken to correct it. But most of all, one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about this is that I know from growing up in Spoonersville that there's still a substratum of what, despite all the quote unquote progress we've made in Barbados, substratum of what is called obey in Barbados. It's a natural thing where you know, cultures where I'm sure Dr. Innis and Dr. Richard are familiar with the concept of syncretism, where religions borrow and mix and things from what's happening culturally, right? So therefore, one of the reasons why this would offend a lot of Barbadians who might not have the chance to talk about it. You remember that incident in Africa when bones that were taken from Barbados, the same ground, I think?
Not bones. They weren't bones.
Soil. It was soil.
Oh, okay, soil.
Yeah,
soil. But there was enough. Barbados felt offended that there was disturbance of that, and they have therefore been very sensitive about when further things that have happened since then. As a matter of fact, some of them would tell you that some of the negative incidents that happened in Barbados are probably related to that because the ancestors were disturbed. So therefore,
Right.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think your observation is very kind of interesting, especially for me as a historian. One of the reasons why I think so the three things. The first thing is I would have to say this is the communities that are involved, all of them, and even people who are creative people, academics, etc., have really said they want the project to happen. They don't actually have a problem with the overall project happening if communities are involved, the public is
Right.
involved, if protections are done, if we offer and observe some of those the spiritual guidance of the people who utilize the site. So this is all kind of right for just cultural work that has to be done. This is the work of people who do heritage in culture, etc., to just work through some of these issues. And that's why some people have come together and said, well, look, let's just take a little pause. It doesn't have to be a long pause, but let's just pause, let's reflect, let's think about what's been done here. Let's move forward with more positive intention, making sure that we do everything right by this site. And leading into that is also the discussion around legislation and making sure that we have a full protective policy environment that starts to really identify these cultural sites. And there are many, many more, not just burial sites, but sites that
There you
relate
are.
to our African history, our identity, our indigenous history. All of these sites need to be identified and protected. And I think sometimes we think of archaeology, we think of cultural heritage as being some kind of impediment to development. It's not, especially on such a small island. You can make so much more of the stories that you tell if you have stories to tell. So this is
Precisely.
really an opportunity to move forward again with good intention, make sure that we have all the legislation in place to protect these sites, to make sure that we have a heritage industry that my students, when they graduate from university, can become successful working archaeologists, cultural managers, archivists, all of the people that we need to run a cultural industry. So, there's so many gifts to be born by doing this work, but we have to sit down and do the work. And I think that's the lesson of this experience, especially for me. I share in the complete frustration, the complete heartache about what has happened. But I've been actually very inspired by the very people who've been affected by this the most, that they just want to see things move forward, and they're willing to. They're willing to work with government to move it forward. I think all of us, if we're going to memorialize this site, all of us need to have a say and to move together to do all of the things that are required. I think that's really what our ancestors would want. No, I think that's the lesson of this story. Dr. Richards, I don't know if you have any
Yes,
ideas
correct.
there as
Yeah,
well.
Dr. Richards wants to say something. Yes.
Just to continue on what Dr. Innes was saying, I think that, the old saying, give me lemons, yeah, and I'll make lemonade. Well, we have some lemons here. And I hark back to what I said earlier up. What happened in New York was a big misstep politically, but it has changed the world. And little Barbados can change the world again.
But that needs, with all due respect, there has to be an awareness, a consciousness,
And a
and a
receptivity
drive
to
to
that.
do that. I'm afraid that something like this, I don't want to say it just falls through the cracks and become just another 7-day wonder, and then we lament about it and people come and research and write theses on it later and down the road. I think
I,
we have to jump on it and be activists in promoting its protection. And like some of the things you talk about, Dr. Innes, I assume that there were some legislations and guidelines, protections in place, and therefore what is happening would have been prevented. But no, it seems that we have a long way to go in that regard.
as well, yes.
Yeah, I think it
Sorry, go ahead.
requires a review for sure, a review of
Yes.
what
What
exists already and
exists.
what needs to be done for sure.
I wish
Sorry, go
Maxine,
ahead.
I'd like to hear the Minister of Culture, the de facto one or the practical ones, speak and talk about this and just
All right.
frivolity. Come on, this is a serious business here. That will test your metal. I mean, Doctor has talked about some of the stuff. I can envision stories being made, movies,
Yes.
videos being made to enrich the
Yes.
imagination.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, it is so rich. But I hear a lot of talk about the cultural industries. What they call it is what the orange is not. Is that the
Orange
orange economy?
economy.
I think
Um,
it's about the orange. There's a vineyard of oranges, and we just make it like it go to waste.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
I mean, I just looked at the time on my tablet there, and I realized that I committed my guest to 8:45, and we could go on and on, but I also have somebody else waiting. But a couple of things. Somebody just asked about the soil, but my understanding from what you're saying is that perhaps things were stopped at a point where it has not been removed and so on. Is that the case? And therefore there's scope for doing it. Now, I want to pick up on something that you said, Dr. Richards, when you talk about the Center for Atonement. And my recommendation and my plea and request to government, I would even say the demand to government, is that the corporate entity or entities which would have been responsible should make some significant financial commitment to doing what you described as part of trying to make some lemonade out of this lemon. I was going to say this lime. We make lemonade out of lime, so I would say out of this lime grove that they've created, because it is to my mind, and it is really as I said, my concern is that there are many people out there who don't just see this as a bad accident or a bad situation. It is something truly devastating for a number of people for a range of reasons. And I really think that we need to hear from the authorities. We've heard what was done. GLYNE has some pointed questions which we need to answer, but I think we need to hear going forward, because we don't want this to die and then the materials be removed and disposed of in ways that do not allow us to investigate as best as we can, given the circumstances, and that respects, our ancestors. So I was just, I would want to ask if each of you, if there's any
Before they
final.
go, one
Yeah,
last comment.
go ahead. Yeah.
With all due respect,
Mhm.
I believe in a principle of when you're dealing with issues and people and circumstances, trust but verify.
Mhm.
I would like to ask: is that site secured or just left to itself? Given the missteps, it should be properly secured in a very meaningful way. And I think too that we have to understand, Maxine, government. This really is the ball of the ball part of government. BTI, the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc., is a government statutory corporation or company, right? Financed by the government and the taxpayers of Barbados. The Barbados Museum and Historical Society gets a subvention from government.
Right.
So the taxpayers' money is deeply involved in this. I think we have a right to demand that everything be done to pull this back as much as possible and to prevent this kind of sacrilegious, devastating, insulting, horrifying things from happening again with something which we're supposed to price so highly. I don't understand how it seems that the whole arrangement seems rather slipshod to me. I might be wrong because I'm talking of ignorance, but when I listen to the pronouncements being made by BTI spokesperson, they're covering their asses. I say they're protecting. They're mollycoddling. They don't want to admit. And I think that the heat should be turned on to make sure that Barbados' future gets what it deserves and what it requires and what it demands, and nothing less will make me happy.
Okay, and over to you. Any final comments?
Well, just a final comment about that. I think that, I mean, I think we've seen some very good commitment from BPII to address all of the archaeological concerns. So all of those concerns around the archaeology that can be done now are being done, and I'm quite satisfied that that's what's happening. The engagement with the public and communities, I think, can be done a little bit better, and I think they're starting that process. But the issue here really is about, as you said, people have to be engaged, not only on one side, so the developer engaging the public, but the public also has to be able to defend and protect the site as well. And
Precisely.
that shouldn't be something that is seen as a threat to anything that's happening here. In fact, to me, it just makes, as Dr. Richards mentioned, with examples like the New York African burial ground, that's what helped to make the site even more treasured by the community, was understanding that people had to get involved. And that's going to help you in the protection moving forward. It's going to have value in the process. It speaks to actually, even the question of petitions. I'm thinking to myself, people get so upset when they hear people having a petition out, but our ancestors used to petition for their freedom from that site. So we have to value this process as part of living in a democracy. And I think if people come and they care about the site, value those beliefs and honor that relationship that can be built with those people. So for me, this is just, we have to move forward, and I'm willing to do that, but I'm also a historian. So we do have to take account for the losses and think about what hasn't happened as a result, and do our best to make it things go forward in a better direction. Dr. Richards.
Dr. Richards, any final comments?
No final comments. That was very well said.
Okay, I just really want to thank you, and I want to thank the 560 persons, the last number I noted who were watching, and I want them to join the 148 who liked the program to share and to like the program. I really think that both of you would have contributed to a better understanding of what people are talking about when they talk about the recent debacle of whatever you want to call it that arose in relation to our ancestral Newton burial ground. I think that there's a lot that we can share, and I am sure at some point you will be willing to come back. And GLYNE, before I let them go, I want to invite Dr. Richards to an evening of alumni to teach us, and remind some of us how to play a worry an evening. We've been trying to find things, and I'm doing that in my position as president of the Alumni Association Barbados chapter, because I mean it's something I don't know too many people who can play, and I probably can do with some refreshers, but I really like the game. I think when you reach my age, and having gone to KFL this evening for 50th anniversary faculty, to remember that I was a student at KFL 50 years ago, says something that I need something to keep the brain ticking over. But I will certainly call on you, and I am sure that you will both consent. Here we GLYNE. I'm sure you will both consent again to come and share some of your great knowledge about not only this, but other areas that are important given your respective interests. And so thank you very much.
Before they say goodbye, I just want to express my personal satisfaction and pleasure engaging with you. It made me think of some things and remember some things that I hadn't thought about for a long time. And there's some other aspects we could become more technical, and the public become engaged if you can have a session where you can actually explain the process step by step, so they can understand it, what you look for, what you did, etc., and the process, the results. And I think that would be a worthwhile education. I myself would like to be exposed to that. I look forward to, like Maxine just volunteered you for a further session. I look forward to such a session.
Well, thank you very much. And from the comments, I've seen several comments from the audience saying, expressing their appreciation and so on. So I want to thank you, EZD, saying thank you both. And somebody mentioned Dr. John Hunt, and I must tell you, I also reached out to Dr. John Hunt, and this was the method by which I was able to connect to these two guests, Dr. Tara INNIS and Dr. Anthony Richards. Thank you very much, and I will be staying in touch. You might be sorry that I made contact, because I will make both of you miserable, whether it is Alumni Matters or the Marcia Week Show or something else, because I find myself involved in all kinds of things. But I really think that you help to really enlighten Barbadians on what I consider to be a very serious and important issue. So thanks again.
Thanks again. God
Thank
bless.
you.
Thank
Take
you. You're
care.
welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you. You're very welcome. And as I said, I will be in touch. So thanks again. And GLYNE, I really think it helped us this evening. You know, and
Yeah,
somebody
because,
asked the question before, and if Stephen Strickland is in the waiting room, we can bring him. But before that, hi Stephen. But before we get into talking about you, I just wanted to go over a comment here. Lena Bell was saying, "Okay, Pedro, thanks. I am still unclear about the allegation flag being taken to Ghana for a ceremony. So it wasn't the flag, it was the soil." Lena, let me say to you, and I will look for my photographs. I've got some photographs. The Prime Minister in a ceremony in Accra, Ghana, I think it was Accra, I have to go, but in Ghana for sure, would have taken, it was a ceremony, I guess, recognizing the connection between the two, would have taken what people were saying were bones. But of course, as you imagine, if we're talking about ancestral remains, there are highly likely to be a lot of bones and more soil. It was soil taken from the Newton, from what we are told from the Newton burial ground. What upset Barbadians beyond that was the fact that in carrying out the ceremony and burying, placing the remains, you know, the box of soil or whatever it was, the flag was lowered into the grave. Now, anybody who knows the protocols about our national symbols and most importantly our flag, it is not, even if you have a flag on a pole, a flag pole, it is not supposed to touch the ground. And I'll give you an example. When I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, I had a flag, and we could not extend the pole far enough, and because of the size of the flag, we had to be very careful that it did not touch the floor in the office, because there's some very clear protocols, and I think perhaps one day I will grab hold of some of them and indicate to people what should or should not be done with things like the national flag and so on, how it should be used. I've seen people with the broken trident or the flag placed on garments in some interesting places, on the derrieres or the behinds, for example. That is a no-no. I remember a very enterprising person trying to sell me some objects like cushions and so on. I said to the person, as much as I would love to support you, I'm not going to buy objects where there's use of the national flag, etc., in ways that were inappropriate. So, but people need to understand that.
Maxine,
but the flag was, yeah, well, the government needs to tell us what happened with the flag. Yes, GLYNE.
Yeah. That part, if I may just add quickly,
yes,
that there are protocols about, the rules are that if you want to use the flag or any commercial artist, you're actually supposed to apply,
get permission,
show how you want to do it and get approval or not.
Yeah.
So, but really, it's amazing that there's a strong belief. I even got it into my mind that it was the bones, because the young people talk about the bones. It was the bones, right? Bones, right. So
people were saying bones, but you know, I like to investigate and ask questions, and because my concern was, where would you find bones? I mean, think about it. You excavate a grave 10 years after the death of a relative, 15 years. I mean, in St. Stephen's Church, my maternal grandfather is buried, and in there is buried one of his sons, and in there is buried one of my nieces, who would have been his great granddaughter. So my grandfather and my niece will be his great granddaughter. But I can tell you, when you open those older graves, what you typically find is soil, because the bones have, and you may find bones, but not significant numbers and so on.
But Maxine, in the same way that mistakes have been made with the handling and management of the
I agree.
Newtonburg. Something could have gone wrong, and we're going to Ghana too.
I
It was
agree.
Ghana.
I mean, I
So
don't know that we should take that like
right.
you know,
Anyhow,
it should be well. There's another time I will explain to you
okay,
where I saw what might have been the genesis of that decision, but this is not
okay,
the time or place. So, but I hope that the audience and Stephen, I don't know if you how much of it you saw, um, before we start to talk about another issue which concerns our people, because we're talking about the treatment of our ancestors, our past, our people of our past, and what we're going to talk about in a minute with you in terms of national insurance is the situation now and going forward, and what may end up being another kind of mistreatment if we're not careful. So I want to thank you for waiting, but when you get in, sometimes you say, um, we have a lot of time, and then you realize that it gets so interesting. But I want to, um, members of the loyal opposition, thank Stephen Strickland. Strickland, I'm just making sure they have your name spelled correctly.
It is correct.
It is correct. I looked up again, and Stephen, as you know, is now a retired public officer, but who has several years in working in national insurance and has a solid understanding of the workings of national insurance. In recent times, we have had discussions. Well, I mean, there have been ongoing discussions over the years, but in recent times, the National Insurance Scheme and the National Insurance Fund have come under serious scrutiny, and where there are concerns that, among other things, the use and misuse of the funds may jeopardize it. We had government doing a significant debt restructuring, which impacted the fund in up to about $1 billion, etc. But the most recent issue now, and Stephen, I will do this, but you can speak to the issue from in the way you want to. But in the most recent situation, a number of persons who typically would have been considered employees by the kind of job they do, their relationship to the person with whom they're working, their employer, etc., they have now been identified as, in essence, to put it very simply, self-employed, because they're operating on a not a contract of service, but a contract for services, and that impacts national insurance contributions and so on. So, having said that, I want you to share with us your thoughts on some of these issues in a way that helps us to understand the national insurance scheme, its importance to Barbadians, and the implications of these recent developments. I hope I hope that I'm not saying too much, but we will engage, and I open it up to you to share with us.
First, I'm gonna say good night to GLYNE, Maxine,
yeah,
and
Thank you.
Marcia in her absence, and the loyal opposition. I I'm I'm always excited about national insurance and sharing for the benefit of Barbadians. The match of national insurance is more than a contribution; it's your lifeline. And I'm certain that through the years, many individuals and present do not feel as if it's their lifeline because persons come to national insurance at the time when they most need the support of the contributions that they would have paid. And it is important for us to understand first the how national insurance operates as an entity. Um, Prior to the 1st of December 2024, the national insurance the finances of nationals were run by the board. The recruitment and management of staff was with central government, so that there's nothing new in respect of national insurance social security services in respect of the finances of the fund. And as you said, Maxine, unfortunate there was that write-off of over $1 billion,
And then
but
Yes.
there
1.3.
has been $1.3 billion. Okay, but you see, because the board, National Insurance Board, is run according to ILO standards, in that it is tri-party. All employees in Barbados are represented on the board by the two major trade unions, that being the Barbados Workers Union and the Hotel Association. I'm sorry, and the National Union of Public Workers. All employers are represented by the Hotel Association and the Barbados Employers Confederation. Because national insurance is a social security scheme, there is the person from the Ministry of Labor who represents the social security side of national insurance. Because it's a financial institution, the director of finance sits on the board. So of the 9-member board, there are 6 individuals who have special interests for the collection, administration, and protection of the fund. The other 3 persons would be the chairman, who at present is Reginald Farley, the deputy chairman, Rodham Adams, and one other board member, so that when the decision was being taken for the write-off of the $1.3 billion, I hold it to the feet, especially of the two trade unions, the Hotel Association and the Employers Confederation. They had a right to stand up to the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, or whoever, and says, no, this is the people's money. But obviously they folded on that occasion, and therefore there was the write-off. But it goes even further back than then. During the campaigning for the 2018 general election, the Prime Minister made the promise and gave the non-contributory pensioners a substantial increase.
Yep.
That had to be followed by an increase for the contributory pensioners. While the non-contributory pensions are paid, as it were, from the Treasury, the contributory pensioners, and therefore the fund, yes, we can say the pensioners deserved it. We're not going to discuss that. The fact of the matter is that the fund came under a heavy attack at that present moment. And then from the days of the 8% pay cut, along with in 2020 when we had COVID, there has been a large shift, as you said, Maxine, earlier, of entities shifting from employment to subcontracting.
Yeah.
And the 2022 actuarial report indicated that only 1 out of 8 self-employed persons were paying contributions.
Wow.
So I'm saying
1 out of 8.
1 out of 8 were paying contributions. So when you look at those 3 aspects, the so that we had the actual reporting of 2006, one of those things would have brought us that if things were on keel, then it meant in 2022 for the actual report, we should not be in the state that we were in. But remember, during the last campaign, the Prime Minister said clearly that we had to deal with Social Security. She never said what she was going to do. Persons did not ask, and therefore we are where we are at. So I would want to begin by outlining what the state of the fund and why it has come to where it is today. Now, National Insurance became a Social Security, a full board in December of 2020.
23. 23 or 24.
23, yes, 2023.
23, I think
Okay.
it was. Time flies.
Now,
Yeah.
I am very disappointed in the performance of the board to some extent in relation to staffing. because the National Insurance Fund is standing at $4 point billion. Okay, subject to correction. They have all the opportunity for recruitment of staff. There were those who would have opted. I think there were only 20 persons who opted not to go with the board. So obviously, they knew they had to replace those 20 persons. National Insurance is short staff, no question about that.
It is.
Especially
It is short.
short staff. Because when you're looking at a staff managing a fund of over $4 billion, paying over 40,000 pensioners every month, and it's gone up just recently, collecting over 5,000 new claims every month. Our compliance section, for instance, there's one inspector who covers the whole of St. Lucie and part of St. Peter. So you look at the size of the compliance section. I would have thought that by now, the positions that persons chose not to take up with the board would have been filled, and there would have been an increase in staff. As I see at present, national staff needs, I mean, there's so much, the staff are overburdened. They're doing a very good job, but they're overburdened with the volumes and the demands of a social security scheme. I remember when I was there, because I went back, I retired, went back, retired and came back again in 2020. And I remember being at a supervisor's meeting in March of 2023. And I said to them, what national insurance needs most is first cross-training of staff. Because you have staff in national insurance, and I'm not putting it down, this is the reality. You have staff that have worked in national insurance for 15 years and don't know a whole lot about benefits. They don't know much about benefits. Okay. So if a person asks that person, knowing they work at national insurance and expecting correct answer, they may not get that correct answer. That's one. Two, it is important for the department to engage training in the culture of the department, not customer service. Yes, that may be helpful, but the culture of the department, that just will never go forward unless the staff understand the culture of the department. Because we have individuals, we are drawn from a pretty uncaring society. Let's be honest. But second, so you have staff that were born with 1, 2 carrots in the car park, and I'm not putting them down. But you bring them into an institution, this is a social security scheme, and they do not know anything about social security. So if we're going to, and I said this at the meeting in 2023, that they need to engage, have training in the culture of the department. That may require them bringing in a consultant. I don't know which consultant they're going to bring.
Another one? Oh, Lord. Another consultant.
Okay. But I was asked at that meeting who can do the training, and I made myself available. I'm not going to get the job. But sufficient that I'm saying that national insurance, if it's to meet its full potential, those are some of the things that need to be done and urgent in order to push national insurance forward, because they say they have the resources available. They have the qualified staff available. It's just a matter of sensitizing them to what is important, so that national insurance fund in itself is financed through three main areas. And if there are any questions you would want to pose as I go along, I would welcome them. But it is financed through 3 main areas. One, real estate. National Insurance owned Frank Walcott Building, E. Humphrey Walcott Building, the Ministry of Health. The Frank Walcott Building that the Ministry of Health is in.
Right.
E. Humphrey Walcott Building, the Ministry of the Civil Service is in.
Next door.
Bajan Towers, which Kaipo and those other government agencies are in. Towers 2, the electoral office is in. And United Nations building on some guys. So that through the years, National Insurance has really invested in real estate. We're not going to discuss whether they get the rentals from all of them, but I'm saying that there's the properties that national insurance does own. The second will be that of in respect of treasury bonds, paper, whatever else. And there's investment both local and overseas. And then the other area will be that of contributions. And I will address the issue that you would have put on the table in respect of self-employment. I'm going to start with self-employment. And there is legislation which was passed, which became effective from the 1st of January 2024, which, in my opinion, is unfair. It is unfair in that national insurance legislation indicates that anyone who is gainfully employed, either self-employed or employed, must, once they're employed for $21 per week or more, must pay contributions. But from January 2024, the stipulation is that self-employed persons must pay a minimum of $1,200 a year. Now, let's break that down. It means then that for a self-employed person, your minimum earnings that you're paying on is $135 per week. So it's $21 if you're employed. But on the other hand, if you're deemed to be self-employed, and national insurance holds the right to determine who is self-employed and who's not. Not, as it were, the employer, not the employee. The National Insurance Department makes that determination. And there's a legal section which engages on that matter. So that you have some person who is selling nuts, selling whatever else. The person is barely eking out and earnings as a self-employed person. We are speaking of those who are genuinely self-employed, okay? But you are telling that person that they must pay $100 every month in national insurance contributions. And that is unfair to that person. If that same person was employed, because that's $100 a month, that's $300 a quarter, which gives that person 13 contributions.
Wait, okay, let's walk through this again so that people understand. The legislation stipulates that if you are an employee, right? Persons, this is employees now, you pay, if you're earning $21 a week.
Correct.
Of $21 a week, you're supposed to pay national insurance. Now, the as an employee, you pay, is it 11%?
11.1%.
11.1%.
So and the employer pays 12.75.
So that person, and so the employer pays, so it's 11.1 and 12.75 for the employer. The self-employed person is paying 17.1%. So he or she is covering what would normally be covered in part by an employer. And so they're getting less coverage. I'm just trying to work through it. It sounds, well, it creates some issues, but I'm just so that people understand that at the end of the day, the self-employed person, and you're saying, okay, so it's 17.1. This is why I want to ask. Now, but they don't specify a minimum earning or salary or whatever. It equates to salary. Rather, it specifies for the self-employed person a contribution. That's what I'm trying to understand. So
that's what I'm saying.
They specify a contribution of $100 per month.
Per month. You want to say I'm saying, okay, what I'm saying to you is
before we move on, you're specifying $100 per month in contribution. but an employee earning 21 at a minimum, which means
That's,
that he or she, if you were
84. That's $84 a month.
$84 a month, that's the minimum. But you're saying, but then you're saying that the person has to, because $100 per month in country, because $84 at 11% of 84 is $8 and something. 11 is 80, 10% of 84 is 840, and additional 1% is 84 cents. You understand? So I'm just looking at that the self-employed person is really being asked to make heavy contributions.
Right.
Rather
Correct.
than saying that you should, if in other words, why is it that you are specifying an actual contribution, a minimum contribution for a self-employed person, when in fact that's okay? Now let me see if I don't want to complicate it for the audience, but you're saying there are two things. One, you're expressing a contribution as a percentage of your earnings in terms of how you spell it out in the law. On the other hand, you're not relating the earnings. You're saying you will pay this minimum contribution, which says that it is not flexible at a minimum, because you're saying
No.
you will pay this. Now, suppose I do not make, because you can convert that. If you divide 100 by 17.5%, it will tell you how much they have to earn to be able to pay that. Now, if you look and compare that to $84 a month, it to me is suggesting that self-employed people earn for substantially more money than anybody else. Now,
Thank you
here's
very
the crunch.
much.
Here's the crunch.
What are the benefits?
Now, before we get to the benefit, here's the crunch. And I want to tie it in with this thing of contract workers. Government is saying to people who were reading the road, for example, you are no longer an employee, you are self-employed.
You're an entrepreneur.
Stick a pen there, Maxine.
Maxine, good.
When there were those who were working with the ASH program,
yes.
Right.
National Insurance determined that they did not have a category under which to put them.
Right.
So
but
that
government was telling them something.
The length of time that those persons were working in the ASH program, they were not paying contributions. But hear this. The ASH program ended, I think, on the end of March 2022.
Okay.
It meant that they would have been paying no contributions.
Right.
They became unemployed the 1st of April.
Mm-hmm.
To qualify for unemployment, they would have had to have had at least 20 contributions between April to December of 2021. They had none.
Right.
The government of Barbados went and paid contributions for 6 months between July of 2021 and December of 2021, that all those workers could get on it. They paid both the employee and the employer's
and
portion.
To be honest, they should. You know why? Because when you apply the was this self-employment rule applicable back in 2021? When was this legislation?
Self-employment has been way back in this.
So that $100 a month goes back.
This new legislation in respect of the $100 a month, which is $1,200 a year.
Yes.
Took effect from the 1st of January 2024.
Okay, well, fine, because I know that self-employment existed. My point, therefore, is, well, before we get to now, because I want to look at that and the implications for low wage earners who are put in this category. So before that, my thing is this, that since government was wrong, and I say wrong because, as you said, National Insurance has the right to determine whether you qualify to be categorized as a self-employed person, okay? Correct. Or if you should be treated as an employee. Basically, National Insurance said you are not and a self-employed person according to our definitions. Government should never have done this to you. That's how I'm interpreting it. This, having got that the definition, government should not have done this to you. And as such, and because they are not,
But
let me finish the point. I'm finished with the point, Glenn, because I want to work this through. Because the people were not earning large incomes, they probably would have been utilized. In other words, if they were employees, they would not have had a choice. It would have been deducted, right? And so a person who, I mean, I'm not telling anybody not to pay. I pay national insurance as an employee, as self-employed for 10 years and so on. And then as a member of parliament, there was another arrangement where we had to pay and whatever. But the point I'm making is that if a person is not earning enough, who is living from paycheck to paycheck, and is told you're going to do this. The reason why it is compulsory and is deducted by the employers is to avoid the situation of people not paying. Glenn, I'll come back. I think you want to say something.
Yeah. I'm going to change gears slightly. I think it's very. I think what you were talking about, what both you and Steve were talking about the ash workers, what is pure political manipulation of the NS funds.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
political. Right, okay. Fine. I think it is very instructive. That's when Stephen said that given the workload, etc., and demands on the staff of the NIS, he thought that the best thing would be increase staff. But what have they done? They increase salaries. I understand they've had some very, I've not been able to hear what percentage yet, but I understand they've had some very sizable. So it tells you a lot about the character and the philosophy and the operational thing. Like the first thing they can do is to increase salaries. The rest of the country is struggling, but here you, and they're not earning anything, they're not selling anything, they're not inventing anything, they're not bringing foreign exchange. They're increasing salaries out of the contribution of workers. I think it's horrible. And then,
sorry, go ahead.
Before you go.
Sorry, you go ahead, man.
I think that the political manipulation of the NS has grown deeper and deeper. I think the NS has gotten a bigger mess. We had, I don't think, as a newsman for the NIS, the last board that really met informed the public about anything was when Ian Goodnelger was there. He was replaced by Leslie Haynes, who said little or nothing. No, yeah, Mr. Farley, you get no news. You don't know what is happening anymore. The bowels of the NIS, it is just fancy ads and promotion. But it is, to me, it's something troubling deep within the NIS. But particularly when the IMF has access to it. A lot of what you're saying is because the IMF is now in control of the Barbados economy. I know from history, what became the INNIS in 1967 had been talked about from the 20s and 30s in Barbados. Agitated for Charles Duncan, all those early people taught. I remember saying in 1934, 37 manifesto, where they talk about the equivalent. So this is something that should be dear to Barbados. And now we are seeing where, in spite of all the fancy buildings you got, the purpose, the soul, the spirit, the ethos has changed. I only know that Reggie Farley is chairman because you said someone, one other person mentioned it. I've been trying very hard to look up who's the board. Rodden Adams is the deputy. I only knew he was the deputy still when in the Christmas ad he appeared in a Christmas hat and a red outfit for like Santa Claus. To me, it is not fulfilling its real purpose. The pioneers of that system, the men who sacrificed for this, must be disgusting. The present way which is being managed and the reduced effects and the reduced benefits that are going to people. I bet you, mark my words, a lot of those people who are paying that $100 a month, right? A lot of them, when they come, given the way the system is being manipulated to suit the IMF and its requirements, some of them might not even get anything. They might not qualify for anything. And then you have another social problem in your hands.
I want to ask you something. Thanks a lot, Glenn. I think that's important. And I'm gonna connect that increase in salary with something. Stephen, you mentioned on the staffing, right? From from your many years of experience, what areas are particularly in desperate need of additional staff, and what functions in terms of the activities of the national insurance meeting the needs of processing claims? Where are the major staffing deficits? That's my basic question.
Yeah, I'm going to address that issue, but I want to get back to something which I want to share in respect of the whole issue of self-employed persons in Barbados
Okay.
and the consequence of
Yes.
not paying. Okay, now,
Right.
the two areas that most come to mind would be compliance,
Mm-hmm.
because those officers are the ones on the road who have to ensure that employers
Mm-hmm. Are
are
doing
um, making
what
their
they're supposed to
payments,
do.
that there are those hidden businesses. Because when an officer passes, there are many businesses, there are thousands of businesses in Barbados that have persons working in the back and whatever else, and are exploiting the staff because no one knows there is a business there. There's only one employee. So if that person makes a report, it's obvious that that person made the report and that person is going to be fired. So that's one of the areas. The second area is that of the benefit section. Um, they really need staff. But then there is an IT problem, because you have claims that are in national insurance now that have been in there for 4 weeks, and I'm not exaggerating, and no one can see them.
Well,
No one can see them. So persons will call in, and you're unable to process that claim because you can't see it. So those are the three areas, but the benefit section really needs additional staff, because when you're looking at over 5,000 new claims per month for a staff of about 270, which both collect and administer that fund, it's a tremendous workload. I'm telling you. And unfortunately, from 2015, there's been a mass exodus of retirement from National Insurance Office. Well over 40, 70 people retired during that period of time. So it's a tremendous brain drain on the department. Unless the department sits and has a training program for staff in respect of the different um, areas and so forth, it will continue to fall behind. But I want to go back to this self-employment,
right,
and
right.
this is the part that I'm want persons to understand. Now, so you're forcing a person to pay $100 in contributions per month if they are self-employed. Now, this person is unable to pay that. Many persons are unable to pay that. But a non-contributory pension is not an automatic right in
Right.
Barbados. It's not an automatic right. So once you have not paid the required amount of contributions to receive a contributory pension, you would apply for a non-contributory pension. All applications for non-contributory will be interviewed. So between age 16 and 67, which is the pension age at present, you have to be able to answer how were you being supported during that period of time. And it's painful for staff. When you have a man, woman, doesn't matter, at age 67 who was barely eking out a living as a self-employed person, okay, and was paying, and there were those who were paying on earnings of $100, $50 and $60 a week. You want the same. But now you have 107 that are not paying. What is happening now? So that those persons non pension is being disallowed. So we have hundreds of
Sam Stephen,
Barbadians.
Sam.
We have thousands of Barbadians who
Who
are
fall into that?
pensioners, are not receiving an income at this present moment. They are depending on friends and relatives to feed them. I see men who are 70, and as the young boy says, they got to try and break a job. because there's no
Trying to
one to
survive.
support them.
No, but you see,
And it's a serious matter that needs to be addressed. This
Well,
new legislation from January of 2024, I think, is ridiculous. When you have a piece of
right,
legislation which says that a self-employed person who is
must pay.
gainfully employed should fall under the same category of an employed person. Both are employed. And if one is paying on $21 a week, the other one should fall under the same thing.
Same
Not
thing.
you stipulate that whatever else.
The
Go
difference
ahead,
is that
Maxine.
the employee would be paying, would have part of his or her paid by the employer. Now, I want to raise a question within the context of that, because we now have this new requirement that as I said, in one case you're paying on the basis of your earnings, and on the other one you're being told you have to pay a minimum contribution. My question, therefore, is in light of the recent trend, both in government and the private sector, because I understand in construction in particular that this is happening, that people who normally would have been considered employees and for whom the contribution would have been split between the employer and the employee. The question is that persons who would normally have earned a wage is now being told you are no longer my employee. So in essence, you are freeing that employer of that contribution, even though the man or woman is not earning anything, or is earning the same as what he or she would have earned before, and not any significant, as you said, eking out a living. So that's the one thing. And before Glenn, I just want to raise this, and then we can. In addition to that, so we have that now, and I'll stick with construction because that's one of the areas that is projected to be booming, and where in fact we have seen that there has been an increase in foreign and regional employees.
exactly.
Now, my question is this: what is the situation? Because we're talking about the national insurance scheme. Now, let's say, for example, that there is an increase in the demand for labor by 50%, and traditionally there were about 5,000. I'm just putting numbers, arbitrary numbers out of my head. There were additional 5,000 persons, traditionally about 5,000 in construction, but it goes up by 2,500 more to 7,500. But those additional ones, or even more than those additional ones, are because you might be replacing some Barbadians who might have been in the sector. But those persons are foreign. Under what conditions are they retained? Are they working as employees, or are they working as self-employed persons? That's one question. Secondly, if they are working as self-employed persons, and this is where the compliance comes in, are they required to pay in the same way that the locals are? Because I'm raising these because all of these things impact on the sustainability and the survival of the fund. So you're saying, one, you're taking people, well, let me stop there. Do you understand the question I'm asking? I think Glenn wanted to raise something, but
Okay.
I just want to say that, Maxine, it is a shame. I'm glad you focused on the construction sector, because you have some acquaintance with that, some persons, some youngsters who went to work in the construction and were exploited in the most shameless manner. There were no safety protocol. You had to buy your own safety boots. I know people who left and never got paid because the man said, I pay you. Bring foreign workers and pay them less than even the thing, and that drives down the price earlier, more and further for the Barbadian. And where that one time that was the stomping ground for the Barbadians workers in it. Rather than hung them down KFC.
Amen.
I think that they should be going
Amen.
after. There's already thousands of already Barbadian society is being robbed by a lot of the foreign employers. They bring contractors with fund. They bring their people from Brazil. So two people, somebody a Colombian constructing. That was unknown in Barbados. So because they have this global outreach, looking for the cheapest labor possible, compare them, as the people say, next thing to nothing. And the persons are being deprived, are being robbed, society is being robbed, because they can't buy a pen and VAT or whatever. And the INS funds are being depleted, and the whole society is being impoverished. And with all this construction around Bridgetown, etc., who's minding the store? Where's the Ministry of Labor? Where's the activism to correct these? Where's the
Where
have
the
some strong talking
unions?
to really right unions make go on the site and make agitate? Where's the government settling to do that? So I believe that as far as I'm concerned, the Ministry of Labor is compliant with that because this is an IMF government. The government is having a different role. The employer runs the show. The Prime Minister said it's going to be private sector led development, private sector led.
But
You're paying the price. So I
yeah,
have no illusions about it.
I think Stephen, you might want to respond to some of that and what and
Quickly,
raise about the trends in
the
these
whole
new work.
it is a serious trend. In that I think it was in the last Sunday Sun, it would have reported that because Chinese from I think when we built the gymnasium,
Right.
Chinese workers are not required to pay national insurance or um, income tax. So this is not something that started yesterday. The issue now is the volume of contracts the Chinese are controlling in Barbados, not just in government, but
Right.
in private also.
And that
So
that
they're
be
bringing
quick
it.
up in there. That
They're
that
bring,
arrangement typically applied when, let's say, you were working on projects that were
yeah,
part of a government to government,
Government to government, right. That's right.
etc.
right.
But now
Yeah.
you have Chinese companies bidding for contracts
Yeah,
in term what would be equivalent to private companies almost because there's some kind of hybrids. So they've stepped out of that arrangement into the general um, bidding arena for private sector projects, and that creates a very different situation. But go ahead, you were saying.
because, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you're bidding for a contract, part of your overheads and whatever else is the 12.75% in contribution.
Exactly.
So we are private contractor is bidding for a contract, and he has to include the employer's portion in relation to the bidding process. The Chinese doesn't have to. You want what I'm saying? And there's so many other non-nationals that we have in Barbados. I'm on this Springwell Land Lease project, and there are mass Jamaicans and Haitians and whatever else who are flooding into Barbados, okay? And none of them, I would almost say, are paying contribution. So a lot of Barbadians, and they're paid a lot less than Barbadians. So a lot of
They
Barbadians
are.
are finding themselves at a disadvantage, both contractors, employees, and whatever else, because
No,
of these practices.
no.
And
Yeah,
therefore,
sorry, go
until
ahead. I'll
government
come
as
back.
an entity makes a decision for the benefit of Barbadians and the trade unions, if they have the guts to do it, stand up for the workers of Barbados, whether they're members of their union or not. And that's one of the issues in Barbados, that we only have unions who speak on behalf of their members. No, sorry, the two major trade unions, okay? Not the Casuals Union, but those two major, they only speak most of the time on behalf of their own, the ones that they represent. If you're a union, you should represent the workers of Barbados either as a union or on the board, so that the whole issue of self-employment is being abused. And as I said, as Glenn said earlier, it was a manipulation by government to determine that they're not going to pay for all those years, and national legislation states the employer is responsible for the full contribution. They must deduct it at the time. If they do not deduct it, they're still liable. So the same way that government could come and pay for 6 months, they had a right to go back from the time the program started and pay contributions for the staff for the entire period of time. Okay.
I sorry, go ahead.
They, okay. So that there are three things I would want to put on the table before we close the night. One, there are two pieces of legislation. I spoke at a meeting where the Minister of Labor was present at, and he responded on both occasions. We are working on it. Now, there is maternity. And I was discussing this when the time that Yvonne Waltz was the deputy chairperson of the Barrow's Workers Union and the president of the National Organization of Women. In 2006, they changed the legislation whereby persons can receive sickness benefit, unemployment, and all credits. That meaning that the person was away from work during that period of time, and they gave them what is called a credit. I don't have the time to get into that part, but sufficient that women maternity benefit is not a loaded thing. And during COVID, we had a lot of women that became pregnant during COVID. Yes. When they applied for the maternity benefit, unfortunately, they were getting unemployment. And I've been fighting this now for almost 30 years.
Okay.
For them to change that legislation, that maternity persons claiming maternity benefit would not be disadvantaged. The second thing I would want to share very quickly before we close, because we are getting ready to close, would be the whole issue of the maternity grant. Now, the maternity grant where the parents are not married, if the man's name is not on the birth certificate, they must be living together for 2 years, which involves cohabitation. This is not about whether we have sex together, I live with her. Cohabitation. And we know a lot of children are born, parents living in 2 different homes and whatever else.
They call them visiting relationships.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. If his name is on the birth certificate, then 1 year. We've been arguing now for longer than the maternity benefit issue, that because a birth certificate is the highest legal document, and the man has to sign a birth certificate at the registry, and the maternity grant form, he must sign saying he's the father. We argue that there should never be any requirement that they must be living together, because the man has paid the contribution that the woman did not pay. And the maternity grant is only it's 12 something a grant. And so why should couples be made to lie? Because many of them lie, they put the same address. When the check goes out, it comes back because she's not known that address. And these are 2 pieces of legislation that we have continually asked for. I spoke at a meeting with the Minister of Labor, and he said they're working on it.
I want you I'm gonna just I want you to send me a note reminding me of the legislation in relation to those, because the challenge is we're trying. I think they're 2 serious issues, and we're trying to cover that very quickly. But I think that we need to look at that. I think there are 2 substantial and substantive issues that we need to tackle. But before, Glenn wanted to say something, and I wanted to raise something about the increase in non-national workers and the some other things which I have some concerns about. Go ahead, Glenn.
A great source of deprivation to many Barbadian workers, particularly public servants, are the question of the elimination of the 2 pensions that people used to get. A lot of people have been damaged by that, are struggling because of that. In fact, I am told that a friend of mine who confronted a very certain high official, I challenged them. They were given some money in their hand. I said, okay, take that. And there was somebody, this can last. He says, don't blame us. It's the IMF. The IMF has told you cannot give them 2 pensions, because workers in North America don't get 2 pensions too. Right? So that is what that mentality, that philosophy, that practice, because like I said, we
don't deserve. That's what they're telling us.
Another thing is that the IMF, right, and therefore the IMF is controlling and dictating who gets 2 pensions. Remember, it used to be something decided between the Treasury and INNIS, and then it was changed, and now a lot of people are struggling because of that. That is something, because a lot of people were in work and had that legitimate expectation. Then it was changed overnight. No proper rationale was ever given. I remember one Sunday morning on a brass stats, Jerome Walker was saying one thing, and same Minister of Labor, Jordan was saying another thing. That is a policy. There was no policy we can discuss. And then the final thing, the IMF said, you can't have both. You don't have it in North America said. You're too generous. How you all living out here today?
You know,
So that one last thing, the government is, remember, this government is so thirsty and hungry for investment. Now, once you bring investment, it seems as though the government is prepared to shut its eye to some of the sacred practices that we used to follow in Barbados just to get involved in development at the expense and the deprivation and the impoverishment of the Barbadian society.
thanks. I think Stephen, we have touched on a number of very critical issues, and I think we need to not only talk about them, but we need to document these things and explore the full ramification. Because I want to go back, as we were talking about the whole issue of self-employment and the recent trends, because we've looked at the whole issue of the imbalance between the requirements in terms of contributions, and that is made worse by the fact that there seems to be a serious push on the part of government and the private sector following government to move away from having an employer-employee relationship. Now, that is, I mean, and we talked about the Chinese, but I want to ask some question, because in the absence of inspectors, the compliance department functioning, what are the working conditions, the contractual arrangements, the pay arrangements for these foreign workers? You know, we're seeing a lot of people out of Latin America. I consider them foreign. I refer to the CARICOM people as regional employees. Now, what are the arrangements? Are these people being paid as self-employed persons? One, if they're being paid as self-employed persons, are they required? Because we talked about an exception. Now, my thing is that if Chinese workers are functioning in the same capacity as them and not on some special project where the government of China has provided a grant or something and there may be some concessions given, if they are coming and competing like private sector entities, then I believe that their workers should be treated like any other worker. Right. So that is one of the things that I think is important, because the relationship, the situation has changed as far as I'm concerned. It is not any. So in other words, if company X goes and hires one of them to do a job, they would always get the job over.
Of course.
Thing, because they're doing that. Now, that should have been a limited arrangement. Now, the other thing is, for whoever is setting up this project, if you have regional employees, I mean, regional persons coming in, and they are being contracted as self-employed persons, are they paying national insurance? No. We talked about income tax. Now, if these are relative, let's say that these are low skilled in some cases or semi-skilled persons who perhaps for the most part fall below the threshold for paying income tax, they're not paying national insurance, but what benefits are they realizing? What benefits are they able? I mean, if we look at CARICOM, for example, if those things apply and they're not, they're not paying those things, but they're benefiting. Yes, somebody may tell me they pay sales tax, but the average Bajan employee paying sales tax, income tax, and everything else, national insurance. So my concern is, what is the impact that that's going to have on not only the national insurance scheme, but our health bill in providing medical care and so on, education bill. In other words, if people come and participate, and I have no objection to that, it has to be done in a way that is equitable, and before, don't take down this comment from Marcia Nurse. I will read that when I'm done. But I'm just saying that there are broader ramifications over and above that, where there seems to be discriminatory or differential practices in how people are paid, their relationship to the person with whom they are engaging. I signal the construction sector because that's where we're expected to get a boom, and so on. So Michelle is saying the compliance department should be doing their work, collecting their contributions, but as Stephen said, we need more staff, right?
We need more staff. As I said, it is because there's a level of fear in workplaces in Barbados, and for the sake of earning an income, there are those who, against their better judgment, allow themselves to be treated in that manner. Because a self-employed person is not entitled to employment injury.
Okay.
Okay.
Construction as a serious thing.
No, that's good.
No, but I'm saying
In
construction
regards,
where I know. I'm just saying
no,
that if you have and of all the areas of work, that's one of the areas where injury. Well, you can get injuries of various kinds, you know. But
precisely.
I'm just saying that when you, if that is the
Right.
case, then all right. But go on. I sorry to interrupt, but you know, I think
So they're not entitled to employment injury if they so that their medical expense and traveling can be paid. And I know of a situation where this guy was working on a construction site and both hands were taken off with electrical cable.
I
Both hands.
remember that. I remember that
Okay?
incident.
And he got nothing. Okay? Because
Wow.
first he didn't even know, well, he could not identify to national insurance clearly who his employer was. So
Wow.
they don't qualify for employment injury. They do not qualify for unemployment, and they can't qualify for severance either. Okay? So
Wow.
that, yes, not paying national insurance does not affect the health situation because that's from the consolidated fund. But I'm saying when it comes to national insurance, you have persons that some of these persons are here in Barbados, and well, at this present moment, they're not paying contributions, these non-nationals, but they may be here for the next 30 years. And if that continues, when they reach pensionable age,
What
they're
happened?
not going to qualify for a pension, so they'll be a burden to the state. You want
And
what I'm saying?
that's
Because a lot of these persons have to depend on welfare. And go back quickly to what something that Glenn said. The legislation that affects the double pensions went back from the 1st of September 1975. Those
right.
entering the state service after the 1st of September 1975 do not qualify for the two pensions. Okay, so that this has been a long-standing issue,
It's you.
not
Yes.
just with this
But
government.
I know for sure it has been selectively imposed. It has been
It might have
Okay.
been
selectively
selectively
employed.
imposed, but just want to be clear that it
Right,
started
right,
from the 1st of
right,
September 1975 and not of recent. Okay,
right.
but on the issue of pension, and this is one I really want to put on the table because there are many public servants who, by virtue of the fact that they retire prior to 67, they are receiving a pension from the Treasury. Now, you know, it has been stated that national insurance has taken over the Treasury
Payment.
pensions.
Yeah. Payment. Yeah.
Right.
That
The
is not
payment.
correct. That is not correct.
It is the
All national insurance
administration
is
of it.
doing,
Is the
all national
administration.
insurance is doing is the administration of the pension is still at the Treasury. So there are many persons, including a former trade unionist at age 67, and it's happening almost every day.
But,
At age 67, they go to the bank thinking that it was an automatic switch from a treasury pension to national insurance to realize that it's only about $50 on the bank account for them, which is the cost of living allowance that the treasury knows is going to give them. So when they come to national insurance now, they don't have to come to national to make the application.
Oh, I
They
see. So
make it
is it a switch?
no, there's no switch. It
Wow.
was no switch, and it was bad before this statement was made. It's
But they
worse
should
now.
explain properly
but,
because that was
but,
misleading.
Maxine,
It
let me
is
tell you
very
about that.
misleading. It is very
When this
misleading. So just 1
controversy
minute,
about it,
Glenn. Just 1 minute,
yeah,
Glenn. So you
yeah,
don't have a
sure.
situation where that person now must make the application. That claim may take 4 weeks to go into the computer system. It's going to take maybe a month and a
It can
half.
take about 3 months before they can get the pension.
Thank you very much. That person may have a legal commitment, a mortgage, children at university overseas. There are a lot of commitments that I hear. These persons call me. I get the phone calls. You want what I'm saying? Okay.
What can you
And
do
it's
for them?
painful
Yeah,
for me to have to say to them, you want what I'm saying?
The
That
process.
is your responsibility to apply to the National Insurance Department for your pension. You want what I'm saying? So I want that to be communicated somewhere to someone.
And
That public service,
make a plea to government. I will do it now to government to
please do.
correct the information, give the people the correct information, advise them in time because there used to be an ad running. And I remember when I applied for my national insurance pension, I did it months before my birthday.
Correct.
You know, the quality, the time that I would have think. So I did it months before. And I am sure I used to hear ads every now and again telling you to add, give them time. So now apply in advance of the anniversary, you know, your birth date, so that by the time it gets there and you qualify, the
And
process,
that is
the
correct.
application has been
And that
processed.
is
I think,
correct,
like,
Maxine.
yeah.
But I'm speaking about the ones who are public workers.
But that's what I'm saying. The government needs
Right.
to tell them. That's what I'm
But
saying.
that as part of the an additional ad.
That's
Correct.
what I'm saying. They need. I would say in relation to what was done, I'm saying they need to tell public
Yeah.
workers this. So because
I,
when I heard it, I personally thought that there was an automatic shift. So in other words, the Treasury would say, "Well, John Brown or Mary Smith qualifies for pension as of this," and it goes. But
yeah,
you know, and
yeah,
so they were not communicated with properly.
yeah. I just want to say in wrapping up two things. This two pension thing was so when it was when the controversy was as high, I used to get phone calls at home. A man, a woman working in the treasury tell me, "Where you think she or she can get 2 pension, then they get more money than me. They can't get none. They got that one, and they manipulate." Said, "Yes, told me so." I said, "But how can they?" Said, "Because we in charge. When they go home, she will get more than me. That can't happen." That is what has gone on. I know for sure. I probably got these phone numbers that I can't. The other thing is that where the Chinese are concerned, the Chinese workers are not paid in Barbados. Their monies are paid back home. The Chinese system controls every aspect, whether they work for government or private sector. And then the thing about payment of workers is, I remember there used to be a lot of talk among Barbadian workers who would work at the Canadian Farm Labor Scheme that they would contribute to income tax and pension there, and then get little or nothing. They say because they were paying income tax in Barbados too, they should get absorbed a warrant in Canada. The warrant in Canada's law was that as long as you are working for who or what, you have to pay income tax, you have to pay social security. And a lot of the workers told me after that when they were calling for about paying in Barbados too, they were glad that when they got to Barbados and they got some Barbados,
And
then the one
something,
from Canada, they supplement it. But because that is the law, they say that is the law. That there are not extensions for anybody to call. But most of all, last comment, the government of Barbados is supposedly the employer of example.
yes,
You know, right?
they're
They're the
supposed
ones,
to be. They're
right?
supposed
They're
to be
supposed to set the
setting the
standards and
standards
living.
and so on precisely.
It's no longer that.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
unfortunate. I want, before we go, well, I'm going to thank Steve, but before I do that, there was a comment by Marcia Nurse in relation to the earlier part of the program, and I just wanted that put up because it was a recommendation. But Stephen, as I wait for that, I really want to thank you. I think that we had the opportunity to start, and I noticed I said to start, to delve into some very serious issues, demonstrating as I say, the broader ramifications of these decisions. And I recommend to the loyal opposition, to those persons who are viewing it, share and recommend in turn to your friends and family so that they listen and understand some of the complex issues, because there's still some other issues in there. I mean, as I said, I would certainly talk to you some more, Stephen, about the issue of the maternity legislation, the maternity grant, etc. And that's important. Let me see if I can pick up oh yeah, here's Marcy Nurse's comment. She said, Marcy, reading that journal may encourage, because there was a journal recommended in the discussion. Those persons interested in the Newton Plantation burial site should read the geophysical research published in the 2024 Journal of Barbados Museum and Historical Society. And in another post, she said, reading that journal may encourage all who study the paper to request that a similar publication be made regarding the bone analysis of the skeletal remains removed from the site in the 1970s and the 1990s. So I thank you for that suggestion. So again, what is suggested, you go read the article on the geophysical research published in the 2024 Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, and that may encourage us to call for a similar publication, and I certainly would call for that now. I presume that that would make sense based on what you recommended, and I will come back to that another time to remind people. But Stephen, I really want to thank you, and I think I can call you Mr. National Insurance, because there's some other issues that we want to touch on because you talked on IT, but one of the takeaways for me is government needs to revisit, not government, no, the board, to revisit the whole issue of staffing. And I know that the notion was that as part of the civil service, when officers were paid, you might not attract this and what. But what sounds to be critical is not massive salary increases for a few, but the employment of persons in those categories where they do the work. And I would use one of the comments that the Prime Minister used, which is not working in the context in which she used it, but I would, many hands make light work. So if we can get more people in claims, I think benefits, that's what you call it. If you can get more people working in inspection or compliance,
compliance, right? That's
compliance, right. And those areas that you identified, we will get to do the people's business better. And we need also in terms of reporting, because I know that going back 2008, the records in terms of annual reports, in fact, something as basic as bank reconciliations, I can go back to some of the challenges people had. And in fact, there are people in the public service in higher positions now who sat in equally high positions at National Insurance, if you're thinking corresponding, who can come and help us understand what were the challenges going back all those years. But anyhow, I think that we have had, to my mind, is now 11 minutes past 10. And I want to thank you. And I also, again, want to say thank to Drs. Tara Innis and Dr. Tara Innis and Dr. Anthony Richards. They have started us on a discussion which I think we need to pursue on several levels. And I also believe, as I said to them, that they have other interests as a historian and so on. And Dr. Richards in his area and his interests in our Caribbean African connection, that we should and must invite them back again. And Stephen, of course, I will be calling on you again, because this, to my mind, and I want to say it to somebody, I made a note of it so I can't leave the program. The National Insurance Scheme is not a Ponzi scheme. And I can tell you, I have received calls from people who said they were self-employed, entertainers and so on, who really and truly didn't make a ton of money in their thing, but they were working. But now that they are retired, at the age of retirement, are at the mercy of, because as you said, non-contributory pension is not automatic. It's
Maxine, some of those get fixed up too.
Well, okay, I hope so.
Special provisions were made
for them. Before we go, persons who made contributions but didn't qualify for pension. Let's say somebody started working in Barbados and left Barbados before they made the minimum contribution. Do they get, what happens in that case? Because that's something that I was asked before we go.
There are two things. One, if the person, there's a reciprocal agreement between Barbados, CARICOM, Canada, Quebec, and England. Mm-hmm. So that if they have not paid, and as at present, the 500 contributions necessary for a contributory pension, then once they have paid contribution in one of those other jurisdictions, then once the total is more than 500, they will receive a pension based on what they have here and what they work for over there. So you have a situation with those that were working on the Canadian Farm Labor Scheme. There's some of them are getting a pension from Canada and they're getting one from Barbados. Okay. But if this person has not had the 500 contributions, then they will get a contributory grant. So there are a lot of persons who left Barbados and not having paid the 500 contributions at pensionable age. Those persons will still apply for the pension and they will get a grant, which is a one-off payment.
Well, like a lump sum refund almost.
But there's not a reciprocal agreement with United States.
Yes, so they will probably, those persons, will probably just get a check covering their contributions. Okay, and you call it a grant. Well, I think, GLYNE, we did, well, let me say thank you very much to Shakwani Hunt
Oh,
and
yes,
to
oh, yes.
Janine Butcher, because Janine and I was texting Janine frantically as you, because when I got to the university I realized that I had failed to charge my phone this when I came home this afternoon, because I had a pretty hectic day. And before I end, let me just say to people, tomorrow we will have the BARROW Memorial Lecture delivered by the Leader of the Opposition and Political Lead of the DLP at the BARROW Center for Creative Imagination at 7 o'clock. So that's something people may want to take in. But Glyne, I know that my phone was dying and I didn't want
No,
for you
no
to think that
problem.
I had disappeared, but
No
it worked
problem. No
out all
problem.
right. I just dashed out of the service,
Yeah.
and I came, but I had to do that as one of the first students in the faculty, and as I said, one of the first lecturers. And Mr. Strickland, your late sister, was one of my students. But going back to that, we worked in my first job, and I will end with this because we talk about community and so on. As a young clerical officer, when I went to KFL, because I went to KFL part-time and worked full-time, your sister Irela and some others in the summer after I left told the, what's it called, the radio service commission, the service commission's radio, that they would pool their vacation so that I could come and work in the summer. And they were objecting, but then they agreed. So I was able to go back the next summer, thanks to her and so on, and work some more. And from then I was paying national insurance till I retired. And it is not a Ponzi scheme to those persons who are calling it that. Please, it is not. Trust me. Glyne, your last word is.
Mr. Strickland, do you live in St. Lucie?
Yes, he does.
Right. But I hope you have
we are
some,
gathering. We are gathering.
I hope you get some clean water for you. No pink, no brown, no green, but just good, clean Bajan water.
As a matter of
Pink,
fact,
pink and brown.
this weekend,
Yes, browner
as a
or
matter of
lighter
fact,
brown.
this weekend the water is very, very brown.
Oh,
I
there you
caught
are.
water today, and I have a copy to send to the Marceline show, so they can see that the water in St. Lucie is poor, very poor this weekend.
And they got the
Go on,
gall
Steve.
to go in St. Lucie carrying on a big bacchanal, and
With
people going
almost
to live in
every
those
single
conditions.
artist. I heard a long list of performers.
Yeah, you mentioned it. The Friends family, the most favorite artists, there's been everything.
Anyhow,
Disgusted.
thank you very
This is
much. I
Barbados.
think, as I said last time, Glyne, I think we would have done the Marcia weeks, but done Marcia proud.
I
She will
thought
get
so.
a chance to review in the morning, and in fact, she will soon be back. She will soon be back. She's.
Otherwise, you are the senior, so you will take the
I
blows.
take full blame because I was also late. So, Stephen, thanks very much.
Thanks.
And
Good
to the
talking to you, Stephen,
audience,
as
thank
usual.
you very much. The show is nothing without you. So have a blessed and restful evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night.
Good.